Chapter 566. Indeed, Atsu did not follow Lu Chen for the past few days. In the eyes of the black dog, it was usually protecting this good-for-nothing. At the same time, it took some of its favorite monster meat from Lu Chen's hands or the mysterious tree hole as a form of reward. Of course, the most important thing was that Lu Chen had protected it back then. It was Sir Atsu who cherished old friendships that led it to protect Lu Chen. However, even though Atsu's strength had greatly increased after its transformation into a holy beast, it had to admit that although Lu Chen did not seem to have changed much on the surface, he gave off a different vibe than before. It was probably a very intimidating vibe. Ordinary people, even people like Old Ma, who were close to Lu Chen, would not notice this. It was only in front of Atsu that Lu Chen would sometimes let down his guard a little and reveal that slightly terrifying aura. Atsu was no stranger to that kind of aura. It had felt that murderous aura several times before. On some nights when it woke up in the middle of the night, it would suddenly feel that Lu Chen and itself were two burning flames, dark, blazing flames. That kind of aura was very dangerous. If it got too close, it might be sucked into it and burned to pieces. It was terrifying. However, Atsu was not afraid of this, because it felt that its connection with Lu Chen had become closer. However, occasionally, it would also notice that it seemed to suddenly have a kind of bloodthirsty and murderous thoughts. When it saw a weak animal or beast, it would want to tear it apart and drink its blood, but it had no interest in meat. Atsu did not like this idea, and it even felt a little disgusted. Fortunately, each time this feeling appeared, it was very short, and every time, Atsu would quickly wake up. It could not speak, and it could not express itself. It could not explain it clearly to Lu Chen, and it was not very willing to. Atsu felt that although Lu Chen used to look quite smart, it seemed to be smarter than him now. If he couldn't figure it out, Lu Chen wouldn't be able to do anything about it, so he had to think of another way. That was why Atsu had left Lu Chen behind for the past few days. Lu Chen's strength had probably increased by quite a bit in secret, so protecting himself wouldn't be a problem. Atsu, on the other hand, had more important things to do. It was not only for itself, but also for Lu Chen. That guy was so stupid, and with the black fire, he must have the same problem as itself. It had to find a solution and a way out for the two of them. Well, before going to Kunlun Mountain, Atsu actually couldn't come up with any good ideas after thinking for a long time. Until now, the oxen that had been hiding in the depths of Kunlun Mountain suddenly followed them to the Immortal City. This was the first time Lu Chen and the black dog saw oxen appear on Mount Celestial Dragon. They had never seen it before, so they naturally thought that this was the first time this extraordinary spirit beast had come to Mount Celestial Dragon. However, this was not the case. The truth was that oxen had come to Mount Celestial Dragon many years ago, even earlier than Supreme Lord Tianlan. However, after that, oxen hated this place, and after leaving, it was never willing to return. Except this time. Supreme Lord Tianlan was the only person in this world who knew the secret in those dusty stories, so it could be said that he was moved by oxen's visit this time, and he was even more grateful. Correspondingly, he quickly and decisively announced to the top of this mountain that he viewed this oxen in a different light. Both openly and secretly, he made his attitude known. You can mess with me, but if you dare to mess with this oxen, you're dead meat. Well, of course, to be honest, he was just saying it. Of course, oxen couldn't be messed with, and this seemingly polite divine transformation stage supreme definitely couldn't be messed with either. Whoever messed with him would have a short life. In short, overnight, oxen received the transcendent treatment that it used to receive on Mount Kunlun Mountain, even more so. Back on Mount Kunlun Mountain, most of the disciples of the Kunlun party knew that this bull was Supreme Lord Tianlan's pet, and they loved it very much. However, when they met it, they would occasionally make fun of it, and those who were closer to it would go up and touch it, or say a few words to tease it. It was nothing. However, on the top of Mount Sky Dragon, the people of Zhengxianmeng, including those of Fuyunji, all became respectful of this oxen after Supreme Lord Tianlan made his attitude clear, and then kept a respectful distance from it. Perhaps it was also because the atmosphere here was getting more and more tense secretly. Therefore, in this strange situation, Oxen suddenly found that apart from Supreme Lord Tianlan, the only one on the entire Mount Sky Dragon that dared to approach it was a dog. Well, actually, Oxen didn't care about this situation. There were so many people on the entire Mount Sky Dragon, and even though there were several divine transformation stage Supreme Lords, it really didn't care about anyone except Supreme Lord Tianlan. Well, maybe Lu Chen could barely be counted as an exception. Black dog, black dog. At least this dog named Atsu looked good. In terms of seniority, it was a good dog that had come to its side when it was on Mount Kunlun, and it was a good dog that had good eyesight and was eager to be its follower. As a result, Oxen's attitude toward Black Dog improved. Most of the time, it would stay in the Kunlun Palace and sleep. Atsu would also come to accompany it, but it didn't dare to enter the palace because it had been kicked out by Supreme Lord Tianlan before. Atsu was very smart. It knew who it should be afraid of, and who it shouldn't be afraid of. For example, it wasn't afraid of Lu Chen at all, because it knew that Lu Chen was good to it. Even if Lu Chen scolded it on a daily basis, he wouldn't harm it. However, that damn Baldy was different. If it angered him, he might really trample it to death. Oxen quickly sensed this, so it started to walk out of the palace. Then, it calmly brought Black Dog around Mount Tianlong. The people on Mount Zhengxiameng all retreated. Often, a cow and a dog could be seen walking on the main road, while a group of people hid by the roadside and looked at them curiously. Oxen turned a blind eye to this, and Atsu was very happy. It felt very cool. Then, Atsu didn't have enough composure, so it laughed and expressed it. Oxen was very disdainful of this, but it didn't care. Later, it started to walk down Mount Tianlong with Atsu and wander around Immortal City. Oxen and Black Dog's body shape was very eye-catching and prominent. At first glance, it was obvious that they weren't ordinary water buffaloes and native dogs. Their skin color, their body shape, and their spirit, it was obvious that they were either spirit beasts or rare spiritual creatures. If they were captured, they would be worth a lot of money. Therefore, it instantly attracted the attention of countless people, and many people made a move. A small half of these people were crushed and killed by Oxen and Atsu, while the other half were killed by the people of Zhengxiameng and Fuyunji, who were full of disdain and contempt. Most of the time, they would even curse, "Spirit beasts who dare to strut around on the streets of Immortal City like this, how dare you have the guts to have evil thoughts?" What he said made a lot of sense. Beasts were stronger than humans. This reality was quickly accepted and acknowledged by everyone. Then, when Oxen and Atsu walked on the streets, no one dared to stop them anymore. Instead, everyone hid far away. Until one day, when Oxen and Atsu walked on a long street, Atsu was chewing on a meat bone that it had picked up from God knows where, when it saw Oxen suddenly stop in its tracks. Atsu looked out in surprise, and saw a place in front of them that was surrounded by layers of cloth. Oxen looked at that place, and it was rare for him to be silent for a long time. Then, it suddenly took a step forward and walked behind the curtain. In a secluded corner of the street, a pair of bright and clear eyes looked at Oxen's back, and a trace of coldness flashed across its eyes. Chapter 567. Of course, there were guards around the curtain. Although this place was not conspicuous and the secret was well kept, not many outsiders knew about it. However, the thing below was too important, so many people were sent to watch over it. The guards stationed here were, of course, people from Zhengxiameng. Most of them were from Fuyunji, and a small number were from Starry Hall. The reason for this arrangement was, of course, that the leadership of the mysterious underground cave city had fallen into the hands of the two Zhengxiameng forces. As the most popular animals in Tianlong Mountain and Zhengxiameng in recent days, Oxen and Black Dog were already quite famous. The guards standing here also had to change shifts to go up the mountain. After a while, of course, they were very clear about the origin of this cow and dog. At this time, everyone was a little dumbfounded. Not to mention in the Immortal City, even on Tianlong Mountain where the headquarters of Zhengxianmeng was located, these two spirit beasts almost strolled everywhere, and no one was nosy enough to stop them. Of course, unless it was some serious places, such as the cave residences of several deity transformation stage perfected cultivators, or the important places of several mountain halls, this kind of place was not allowed. However, it was hard to say for Atsu, but oxen seemed to be a giant beast that had become a spirit. It never went near places that were taboo and places that might have powerful figures such as deity transformation stage perfected cultivators. Because of this, they didn't go to important places, and people would certainly give face to perfected Lord Tianlan and Fuyunji, so they wouldn't stop them. But this time, it seemed to be a little different. Regardless of whether it was the guards of the Floating Clouds Division or the Starry Hall, as long as they were guarding this place, they had been warned sternly by their superiors before they came that the underground tunnel was an extremely important place, and they had to guard it with all their might. They could not be careless. And they had indeed achieved this. Although there were many problems in Zhengxianmeng today, such as overstaffing, extravagance and exaggeration, and evading responsibility, it was still a hegemon of a generation. It had a solid foundation, and it was still possible for its subordinates to take things seriously. However, the situation they were in right now was a little troublesome. Seeing that oxen and the black dog seemed to be very determined to walk into the curtain, the group of guards looked at each other. The people of Fuyunji looked at the guards of Starry Hall, and the people of Starry Hall looked at the experts of Fuyunji with hope. Then, everyone realized that there was nothing they could do. In the end, someone from the Starry Hall shouted, "Hey! Can you guys from Fuyunji block them?" There were many people on Fuyunji's side. Soon, someone replied, "Why? Why aren't you guys attacking?" The guard of the Starry Hall actually laughed. He seemed to be taking pleasure in their misfortune. He said, "These two bastards came from your Floating Clouds office, right?" The guards of Fuyunji were instantly speechless. Oxen was perfected Lord Tianlan's spiritual beast, and the black dog was the pet of perfected Lord Tianlan's only disciple, Lu Chen. Needless to say, the master and disciple's status was high, but they both liked to keep pets. This was something that could not be refuted. Helpless, when they saw the people from the Starry Hall retreating, the guards from the Floating Clouds Agency had no choice but to walk over. About 10 of them lined up in a row and formed a human wall, blocking the green bull and Atu's path. The green ox looked up and stopped in his tracks. Atu poked his head out from behind it to take a look, and was instantly a little angry. This fellow had recently been used to being arrogant with the green ox, and this was the first time he saw someone daring to block his way. He jumped out, bared his snow-white fangs, and roared at the person in front of him, baring his teeth in a fierce manner. Roar! His meaning could not be more obvious. "You blind people, get out of our way. Don't block our Lord Ox and Lord Dog from taking a stroll." The guards of the Floating Clouds Agency all had bitter expressions on their faces. One of them lowered his voice and whispered, "I say, this is Lord True Immortal's spiritual beast. Isn't it extremely powerful? If it gets angry, won't we be in trouble?" When the people next to them heard this, their expressions became even worse. This situation could be said to be the worst. It was even worse than when perfected Lord Tianlan's disciple, Lu Chen, brought people over to stop them. Although Lu Chen's status was extremely high, he was still a human, and humans had to be reasonable, right? As long as they clearly explained the rules here, and everyone followed the rules, even Lu Chen could not do anything to them. But it was very annoying to deal with this ox and dog. If the spiritual beast in front of them got angry and rushed over to kill people, how would that end up? That was perfected Lord Tianlan's most beloved pet. Would anyone dare to reason with perfected Lord Tianlan? And even if perfected Lord Tianlan was reasonable, he would at most comfort them with kind words and give them some compensation. He would not really kill oxen to pay for it. If that happened, the dead would not be resurrected, and they would have died in vain. They were all people in Zhengxianmeng. Who didn't know this? Even small fries had their own intelligence and wit. Thus, no one dared to go up and criticize her sternly. This was a forbidden area, and she didn't allow them to wander around. However, it wasn't good for them to give way. Otherwise, if they were to be held accountable, Hall Master Shuang would definitely have to bear the consequences. After a while, Oxen became a little impatient. Black Dog saw that no one was paying attention to it, and immediately became angry. Did dogs not care about their reputation? Especially when there was an enigmatic boss, Oxen, behind it. Atsu bared its fangs and roared. It began to press forward with a very fierce momentum. It seemed like it was about to eat someone. The guards in Fuyunji were in an uproar. This black dog did not look like much on normal days, but when it suddenly became fierce, its momentum was very fierce and frightening. It was as if it was going to pounce on them and bite their throats in the next moment. There were a few sounds of pa 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 pa. 3 or 4 people pulled out their weapons at the same time. The atmosphere suddenly became tense. Even the people from the Starry Hall who were watching from the sidelines stopped smiling and had solemn expressions on their faces. The guard duty here was very important. If something really happened, even if they were not the main responsibility, they would most likely be scolded or even punished. Atsu was not afraid of those weapons. It still slowly moved forward step by step. It was half testing and half pressuring. At the same time, a strange black flame flashed in the depths of its eyes. Just when the atmosphere suddenly became so tense that it made people hold their breath, they heard a low moo. Oxen appeared next to Atsu and blocked its way. Atsu glanced at Oxen and put away its fangs. The threatening momentum disappeared, and the guards in front of them immediately breathed a sigh of relief. Unexpectedly, Oxen raised its head and walked forward without saying a word. The guards only saw a blur in front of them, and the huge body of the bull was in front of them in an instant. The guards were shocked and were about to shout for it to stop when they suddenly saw the green ox shake its head. With a scream, the guard who was closest to the ox's head suddenly rose into the air, and then flew into the distance with a strange cry. With a bang, he smashed into a piece of cloth, and then tore off 3 or 4 pieces of cloth at the side. Immediately, the ground was a mess. Dang, dang. The group of guards suddenly stood up with a dignified look on their faces. They unsheathed their weapons and surrounded the cow and dog. Chapter 568. Everyone present was shocked. When the figure flew into the sky, everyone's gaze followed it, then turned their heads at the same time. They watched as the flying figure drew an arc in mid-air, then fell to the side of the curtain with a loud noise. A pile of things were torn off, revealing half of the tunnel entrance that was originally covered. Atsu poked its head out from behind Oxen's huge body and blinked its doggy eyes. It looked at this silent big guy with a look of admiration. It seemed like it really had a lot to learn. I seem to have heard Lu Chen say something like, "A dog that bites doesn't bark." However, Atu immediately felt that something wasn't quite right. Lu Chen's words seemed to be cursing someone. For a moment, the dog's mind wandered, and it began to recall the situation when Lu Chen said those words to it. Was it a sarcastic curse? After all, this person was too bad. He was full of bad ideas and would often be tricked. It was better to be careful. Not to mention the fact that Atsu actually dared to be distracted at this critical moment. The guards in front were in an uproar. They immediately pulled out their weapons and surrounded the 2 spirit beasts. However, they could only surround the 2 spiritual beasts. Although the weapons were extremely sharp and flashed with a cold light, none of the menacing guards dared to make a move against the 2 spiritual beasts. Beasts were stronger than humans. Was this the situation? Oxen seemed to turn a blind eye to the people in front of it. At this moment, its big bell-like eyes were looking at the secret underground entrance that was half exposed, and a strange light seemed to flash across its eyes. Then, without any hesitation, it lifted its foot and walked toward the entrance of the tunnel. Oxen's body was originally extremely huge. Although it had been silent, its aura was very intimidating. As it walked forward, the 5 or 6 human guards in front of it suddenly felt as if a small mountain was pressing down on them. Even their breathing became a little nervous. But at this critical moment, Oxen suddenly stopped and turned back to take a look. The pressure was instantly relieved, and the few of them let out a long sigh of relief. Just when they thought that the situation had taken a turn for the better, they noticed that Oxen had turned around to glare at the black dog, who was standing there in a daze for some reason. With a swing of its tail, it smacked the black dog's head. Atu was startled and woke up. He turned his head to look around and immediately felt a little embarrassed. He barked twice and trotted over. At the same time, he felt a little strange. In the past, he would never be in a daze at a time like this. What was going on today? Could it be that this oxen is too powerful, and I feel very safe, so I don't have any scruples? He had never felt this way before, even when he was with Lu Chen. Atsu glanced at Oxen and thought to himself, I'll have to hold on to this big bull leg in the future. Oxen woke up Atsu. Although it was a little dissatisfied, it didn't seem to be very angry. It turned back and walked forward again. The few guards' faces suddenly became bitter again. However, things had already come to this point, and they couldn't back down anymore. They looked at each other with a dignified expression, but each of them had already mobilized their spiritual power. Their weapons and magic weapons gradually lit up. This meant that they were going to fight to the death. Seeing these few Fuyunji people acting like this, the people next to them also suddenly became gloomy. No one shouted. All the Fuyunji people quickly moved, and a murderous aura rose around them. This time around, there was no longer any panic or apprehension. Instead, it was filled with a bloody aura. This was the characteristic of Fuyunji for many years, and it was cultivated from the sea of blood. In a place further away, the people from Starry Hall were originally gloating, but at this time, they suddenly felt this aura, and they instantly quieted down. One of the people in the lead hesitated for a moment, but he lowered his head and said something to the people next to him. Then, he turned around and rushed in the direction of Mount Tianlong in the distance. Oxen and the black dog were both spiritual beasts with keen senses, so of course, it was impossible for them not to feel this aura. Atsu was the first to stop. If dogs could frown, this black dog would be frowning right now. It was willing to wander around with Oxen, but after all, it had already gained spirituality and knew Lu Chen's position in Zhengxiameng. To put it bluntly, these people were very likely to be Lu Chen's subordinates in the future. It didn't matter if they bullied them occasionally, but it was completely different to fight or even kill them. Atsu instantly wanted to retreat, and it barked at Oxen. However, Oxen, who was usually very lazy, was unusually persistent today for some reason. It seemed that it was determined to go to the secret passage. It turned a deaf ear to Atsu's barking. After pausing for a moment, it continued to move forward. Atsu was dumbfounded, but it couldn't just stand there, so it had to reluctantly follow. The people on the other side were waiting. As the two sides gradually approached each other, the street was silent. The situation was still tense, and a battle was about to break out. At this unusually tense moment, someone suddenly coughed behind the street, and then someone scolded, "Stupid dog, what are you doing over there? Hurry up and come over." Oxen stopped, and Atsu instantly turned around. Then, it saw Lu Chen and Old Ma walking over from the street. Their faces were very serious, and they seemed a little angry. Atsu let out a loud bark, and then it ran towards Lu Chen, wagging its tail vigorously along the way. No one knew why it was so happy. Lu Chen snorted, and then he patted the head of the dog that had rushed in front of him, and said in a low voice, "Stupid dog, you only know how to make trouble for me." Atsu seemed to not understand what he said, and it only grinned and wagged its tail. Lu Chen coughed, and then he walked towards Oxen. Oxen stared at him, and its eyes were deep, and it seemed to be a little gloomy. As for the surrounding guards who were nervously holding weapons in their hands, they still looked very stern, and none of them had any intention of putting down the magic weapons in their hands. Lu Chen walked to Oxen's side, and said in a low voice, "I say, the people here are all the damn Baldi's subordinates, don't do anything stupid." Oxen let out a low moo, but it didn't say anything. Lu Chen looked ahead again, and he frowned, and said, "You want to go down?" This time, Oxen nodded. Lu Chen hesitated for a moment, then he waved his hand to call the guard in front of him, and said with a serious expression, "Do I have the right to go down?" The guard nodded. Lu Chen was perfected Lord Tianlan's disciple, and he was the one who discovered and destroyed the devil cult's lair, so he was definitely one of the few who had the right to go down. Lu Chen said, "Okay, then I'll go down now, and I'll bring these two to have a look." As he said that, he smiled, and said, "You don't think that they'll leak the secret, do you?" It was hard to say, since they were spirit beasts, but one of them was perfected Lord Tianlan, and the other was Lu Chen's, so the possibility of them leaking the secret was not high. Moreover, Lu Chen had said it himself, so it could be considered as giving everyone a way out. Therefore, everyone made way, and Lu Chen brought Oxen and the black dog down. Behind them, Old Ma also walked forward, but he was stopped by the guards, who said, "You can't go in." Old Ma was annoyed, and he pointed at the figures in front of him, and said angrily, "I'm not as good as those two beasts?" The guard nodded. Yes. After saying that, he seemed to feel that his words were a little harsh, so he comforted Old Ma, "Don't be sad, we're the same." After that, everyone felt that it was a little strange, and everyone was a little embarrassed. However, in the midst of the chaos, a petite figure quietly followed behind Lu Chen and the others, and snuck into the secret passage. Chapter 569. It had been a while since Lu Chen last came to the underground city in the mysterious cave. When he walked through the passageway and saw the majestic underground city again, his heart was still the same as when he first saw this place. A feeling of admiration welled up in his heart along with a slightly strange feeling. The blood-red moon was still floating in the sky, emitting a seemingly endless blood-red light. It seemed that it would never stop, nor would it stop. It was like this blood-red moon had existed in this place ever since Pan Gu created the world, and had never changed. When the red light shone on him, Lu Chen's body and footsteps paused. At that moment, he felt an unpleasant aura that suppressed his spiritual power. However, he was not afraid of it, nor did he panic. Firstly, he could endure this feeling. Secondly, he had secretly proven that although the aura of this blood moon was strange, it only suppressed most ordinary cultivators. On the other hand, the mysterious black fire in his body was not affected by this place once it was activated. Back then, black fire had helped him a lot when he was able to break through the siege of the devil cult followers. Of course, with his many years of experience, black fire had already saved him many, many times. Thinking of this, Lu Chen's heart skipped a beat. He looked to his side and saw Oxen and Black Dog walking over. Among them, Atsu's body seemed to have paused for a moment, but soon returned to normal. On the contrary, Oxen, who had always been unfathomable, suddenly trembled and its movements became a little slower after being bathed in the light of the blood moon. At the next moment, Oxen seemed to have turned its huge horns with some difficulty and let out a low moo. Then, it suddenly staggered and almost fell to the ground. This time, both Lu Chen and Atsu were taken aback. No one expected that Oxen would have such a big reaction when they walked into this underground blood moon city. It was even a little scary. Lu Chen quickly turned around and supported Oxen's body. Atsu also rushed over in a hurry. It barked repeatedly and used its body to push against Oxen's stomach, trying to make it stand steadily. However, Oxen's body was a little too huge. Lu Chen and Atsu struggled to support it in a hurry. Fortunately, although Oxen still looked a little uncomfortable, it managed to stand firmly on its own after shaking for a while. Then, it slowly bent its legs and sat on the ground. Lu Chen was also stunned and puzzled. One must know that although the blood moon here had a strange power that could suppress many human cultivators, even if ordinary cultivators came in and felt uncomfortable, they wouldn't have such an obvious and serious reaction like Oxen. Otherwise, they wouldn't have arranged for people from the Starry Hall to come here to do those secret things. The green ox knelt on the ground with its head drooped. After a while, it seemed to be in better spirits, but overall, it still gave off a rare feeling of illness. Lu Chen frowned and glanced at the blood moon in the sky. Then, he whispered to Oxen, "What's going on? If it really can't stand the blood moon, let's go out first." Oxen raised its pair of huge eyes and looked over Lu Chen's body at the houses below that were taller than ordinary human houses. It looked into the distance in silence. Its gaze swept across the street and finally fell on the center of the city, on the strange statue that connected the ground and the cave dome. "Moo!" Oxen called out in a low voice. Lu Chen followed its gaze and looked in that direction. Then, he hesitated for a moment and asked tentatively, "Do you want to go there?" Oxen nodded, but the black dog next to it seemed to be a little anxious and barked. Lu Chen was also a little worried. Looking at Oxen's dispirited appearance, he smiled bitterly and said, "There are two problems. First, you're too big and heavy. I can't move or push you. Second, we're only at the edge of the blood moon. Are you sure you won't die if we go further in?" Oxen hesitated for a moment, but it still looked at the statue in the distance with determination. Clearly, it still insisted on its idea. Atsu looked at it worriedly. However, Lu Chen wasn't Atsu, so he didn't have that kind of reverence for it. Therefore, Lu Chen quickly said without holding back, "Don't waste your time. I don't care if you want to die, but you're a treasure in the eyes of that damn Baldy. At the very least, I don't know what else he values more than you. If I really kill you here, that damn Baldy will fight me to the death." Oxen glared at Lu Chen with a hint of annoyance and anger in its eyes. Then, it put on a disdainful expression. "Tui!" Lu Chen slapped the top of the bull's head and scolded, "What are you pretending for? When I was still by that damn Baldy's side, you used that stupid look to trick me. Do you think I'll fall for it again?" A hint of helplessness appeared on Oxen's face as it fell silent. "Let's go." Lu Chen grabbed Oxen's head and pulled it back to where they came from. He said, "If you have the guts, you can ask that damn Baldy to send you down here himself. If anything happens to you, he'll be responsible for it. It has nothing to do with me. I don't care if you die or not." Atu was a little dumbfounded as he watched from the side. He did not expect Lu Chen to be so familiar with the green bull and treat it like an outsider. As for the green bull, it did not react much to Lu Chen's actions, perhaps because it was affected by the blood moon's brilliance or some other reason. Oxen even sighed softly. Yes, this cow sighed softly. There was a hint of helplessness in its voice, which was almost the same as a human's. Lu Chen didn't care about it as if he was already used to it. Behind them, Atsu was a little puzzled. At the other corner of the cave, behind a hidden rock, a petite figure slowly poked her head out. She revealed a pair of bright eyes as she watched the scene. There was a hint of astonishment in her eyes. In the end, Oxen didn't insist or struggle too much. It just left with Lu Chen even though it was unusually determined to come down to the underground city at the cost of fighting the guards. Therefore, it seemed that it had a strong start but a weak finish. However, from this, it could be seen that even though it was not as obvious as perfected Lord Tianlan's reaction, the green ox clearly viewed Lu Chen in a different light. Lu Chen brought the green bull and the black dog Atu down for a walk, then turned around and left without doing anything. It could be said that he was all bark and no bite. However, after they left, another figure suddenly walked out of the empty underground cave. It was an extremely beautiful young lady. It was White Lotus. Bai Lian first glanced at the passageway that they had come in from, and then a thoughtful expression appeared on her face. She then looked at the blood moon in the sky, and after a while, she seemed to have made a decision. She strode forward and walked towards the strange statue in the center of the city, as if she wanted to investigate it herself. As she walked, her footsteps and movements seemed to be a little unnatural compared to usual. She should have been somewhat affected by the suppression of the blood moon, but it was still much better than the green ox. The suppression was not as great. As she stepped on the long street, a series of crisp footsteps echoed in the city. When the sound wave drifted, it spread to a deep dry well in a courtyard in a corner. A shadow in the darkness moved slightly. It raised its head and glanced at the world above. After a while, it seemed to move very slowly and then slowly stood up. Chapter 570. The huge underground cave was now silent. There were no signs of people or animals, including some common underground creatures such as bats and mice. White Lotus didn't see any of them. There was only the almost omnipresent blood-red light that shone down from the blood-red moon in the sky, filling every corner of this place. After White Lotus walked on the long street for a while, she couldn't help but look around. Those tall houses and pavilions were obviously not suitable for humans to live in. Although the old houses were there, the owners were gone. Those empty tall doors and big houses were stained with the color of blood, giving off a strange and eerie feeling, as if in the next moment, some kind of monster would rush out from some dark red corner and pounce on White Lotus. This feeling was very bad and frightening. White Lotus's delicate brows furrowed. She looked a little hesitant, as if she wanted to retreat and leave this place. However, her eyes then looked towards the depths of this underground city. After hesitating for a while, she finally continued to walk towards the tall but strange statue. Since she was already here, she had to take a clear look. This place was tightly guarded by the men of the Floating Clouds Agency and the Starry Hall. There had to be some kind of huge secret hidden underground. White Lotus walked step by step and approached the statue. Along the way, she walked very carefully. At the same time, she secretly felt strange. Logically speaking, the underground territory was so huge. With Zheng Xianmeng's strength and deep foundation in the Immortal City for so many years, it was really impossible for him not to discover the strangeness of this underground. Then, why was this underground city only exposed recently? Could it be that it was really the ancestors of Zheng Xianmeng who sealed this place? Just when White Lotus was puzzled, when she walked past the door of a big house on the long street, she suddenly heard a sound. The sound was very soft and not very loud. However, because the surroundings were too quiet, it became especially clear and White Lotus heard it immediately. White Lotus immediately stopped in her tracks. Her expression changed slightly and she turned towards the house. The big house looked no different from the other houses that they had passed before. Looking from the door, it was also empty, and there was nothing suspicious about it. However, White Lotus didn't think that what she just heard was just an illusion. She heard it very clearly. She stood in the same place and stared at the depths of the house. For a moment, she was a little hesitant. Should she go in or leave this place? This underground city was so strange. Obviously, it was very likely that there was something strange and terrifying hidden here. However, White Lotus immediately remembered that Lu Chen had brought oxen and black dog here. Judging from their actions and expressions, they didn't seem to feel any signs of danger here. Even if Lu Chen could act, oxen and black dog definitely couldn't. White Lotus lifted her foot and wanted to walk towards the house, but she immediately put it down. After hesitating for a few times, she couldn't make a decision in the end. It could be said that her heart was in a dilemma. However, at this moment, White Lotus glanced at the ground in front of her and was suddenly shocked. At this moment, other than the red light shining on her body and drawing out a shadow on the ground, there was actually another shadow behind her. It was taller and longer than her, and just like that, it appeared behind her without a sound. White Lotus's body instantly turned as cold as water. She even held her breath. Lu Chen brought Oxen and Black Dog back to the surface. Seeing that they came out of the tunnel so quickly, the guards who were originally discussing among themselves were a little surprised. At the same time, many of them had a look of relief on their faces. In any case, in this short period of time, the most they could do was to go down and take a look at the scenery below. After that, they would have to hurry back. In such a short period of time, they probably wouldn't be able to do anything bad even if they wanted to. Everyone had a heavy responsibility on their shoulders, so it was better to avoid trouble. Immediately, someone came over to greet Lu Chen politely. Lu Chen responded with a few perfunctory words and then turned to look at Oxen. After leaving the light of the Blood Moon underground, Oxen's mental state was obviously a lot better. However, its head was still drooping, and it seemed to be a little dispirited. Lu Chen thought for a while, then left the tunnel entrance with Oxen and Atsu. On the way, he greeted Old Ma who was standing on the side. Old Ma rushed over and said with a surprised expression, "What happened? You came out so quickly?" "I'll tell you in detail later." Lu Chen also said perfunctory words to Old Ma. Then, he gestured to Old Ma to help him. Together, they supported the sickly Oxen and walked toward Mount Tianlong. As for the direction, it was naturally the Kunlun Palace of Supreme Lord Tianlan. Therefore, about an hour later, although his spirit had recovered slightly, the Green Bull, who had spent a lot of time on the way, finally returned to the Kunlun Hall under Lu Chen's strong request. Fortunately, Supreme Lord Tianlan didn't go out today. He stayed in the palace. When the footsteps of Lu Chen and Old Ma came from the gate, as well as the slightly messy steps of the two spirit beasts, Supreme Lord Tianlan, who was sitting on the lotus throne, glanced at the gate. After a while, his attention seemed to be completely focused on Oxen. Old Ma, who was following Lu Chen, was about to bow to Supreme Lord Tianlan who was sitting on the lotus throne in the distance. However, at that moment, he felt dizzy, and then a tall and sturdy figure suddenly appeared in front of him. In that short moment, Supreme Lord Tianlan had passed through the long palace and directly came to the side of Oxen. Oxen raised its head, looked at Supreme Lord Tianlan, and called out in a low voice. Supreme Lord Tianlan's expression changed slightly. It seemed that his expression was a little ugly. He walked forward with a sullen face. He first looked at Oxen's complexion. Then, he suddenly put his hand on Oxen's head, touched its ears, and opened its eyelids to have a look. Then, he put his hand on the side of Oxen's chest and carefully felt it. His expression became even more ugly. Where did it go? Supreme Lord Tianlan turned to Lu Chen and asked. Oxen took a look at Lu Chen, and there seemed to be some hidden meaning in its eyes. However, Lu Chen did not keep it a secret at all. In the blink of an eye, he told everything clearly from the beginning to the end, including the matter of Oxen and Atsu strolling on the street at the beginning. After hearing that Oxen actually ran to the underground city, Supreme Lord Tianlan first snorted. Then, when he heard Lu Chen say that it immediately collapsed after entering the underground city, he couldn't help but shake his head. He wanted to say something but stopped on second thought. Then, he waved to the side and said, "Old Ma, you can leave now." Old Ma hesitated for a moment, but he still obeyed and left the hall. The moment he stepped out of the door, he vaguely heard Supreme Lord Tianlan instructing Lu Chen, "You also go down. Do you feel uncomfortable?" Lu Chen slightly lowered his eyes and said, "Well, I feel that after staying there for a long time, my whole body has begun to feel strange. I can't use my strength, and even the circulation of spiritual qi has slowed down. If I really have to fight fiercely in the underground city, I think I can only use 4 or 5 of my full strength at most." Supreme Lord Tianlan smiled and looked at Lu Chen for a moment. Then, He sat beside oxen, pressed its head with one hand, and pressed its chest with the other. After a while, a warm breath of pure yang was slowly emitted from his body. With the appearance of this yang qi, Oxen's face was obviously much better. Lu Chen, on the other hand, stood aside and looked at perfected Lord Tianlan's broad and strong back from the side. Suddenly, a daring idea occurred to him. They are all divine transformation realm perfected cultivators, and they are so powerful that they can shake the world. But will they also be like Elder Yun Shouyang of the Devil cult, who had his heart meridian cut off and could no longer fight back? What was the name of that mysterious magic incantation formation? Well, by the way, it seemed to be called God-subduing spell. Chapter 571. At that moment, Lu Chen was a little absent-minded. Just now, he suddenly realized that it had been a long time since he recalled what happened in the barren valley. Once upon a time, he always felt that that memory was accompanied by unforgettable pain, which was deeply buried in his heart and would haunt him for the rest of his life. He would never be able to find peace and forget it. After all, every time he suffered the pain of being burned by the black flames, he would recall the people and events of the past, as well as the blood on his hands, as well as the things he had seen in those dark times that he did not want to recall. However, now that it had come to this, he realized to his shock that he had underestimated time in the end. No matter how deep the pain was, it would be relieved with the passage of time. If people were not repeatedly reminded of it, perhaps those memories would be quietly erased from the depths of their consciousness. Who would deliberately recall those painful memories, unless it was the kind of unforgettable hatred that had been engraved in their hearts? Young children used to naively think that they would remember every beautiful moment and tell themselves that this moment was so important that they would never forget it. Then, when they grew up and looked back on the past, they found that everything had been covered by the dust of the past, and they could no longer recall the memories of those years. However, they still remembered the solemn and beautiful feelings of the children. "What's wrong with you?" Suddenly, the voice of Supreme Lord Tianlan came from the front, awakening Lu Chen from that somewhat bewildered state. He turned around and saw that Oxen, who had been lying on the ground sickly, had now stood up and seemed to be in much better spirits. He didn't know what method Supreme Lord Tianlan had used just now, but it was like a miraculous cure that had instantly freed Oxen from the state of being suppressed by the aura of the blood moon. After looking around, Oxen walked to its favorite seat at the side of the hall and lay down. Atsu followed it and wagged its tail gently, looking up and down curiously at Oxen's body, as if it was very surprised by this magical change. "I'm fine." Lu Chen naturally changed the topic. Looking at Oxen, he asked Supreme Lord Tianlan, "What's wrong with this bull?" Although the underground blood moon was strange, it shouldn't be to this extent. These days, quite a number of human cultivators from Fuyunji and Starry Hall have gone down there. Some of them have high attainments, but I have never heard of anyone having such a big reaction like this one. Perfected Lord Tianlan took another look at him and said indifferently, "I'm not sure either. Perhaps the blood moon's suppression on Oxen is particularly strong." Lu Chen mumbled, "It's strange this time as well. I remember that whenever this cow was in danger, it would always sense it beforehand and avoid it. It's never been in such a sorry state like this." Perfected Lord Tianlan frowned and hesitated. When Lu Chen saw his indifferent expression, he bid farewell and walked out. Watching his disciple leave, Perfected Lord Tianlan's expressionless face gradually changed. He turned to look at Oxen, who was lying on the other side of the hall. He then slowly walked over and sat down beside Oxen. His expression gradually became a little strange, abnormally complicated, and mixed with some inexplicable emotions. In the quiet hall, after a long time, there seemed to be a sigh. Then, someone said faintly, "Are you already old?" In the mysterious underground city shrouded by the light of the blood moon, White Lotus felt cold all over, as if she had fallen into an ice cellar. She stared at the shadow reflected on the ground in front of her. Other than her own shadow, there was another shadow that was even bigger. This was an underground world that was so quiet that it could even be said to be dead. Under the blood-red light, there seemed to be no living creatures here. As long as the human cultivators in Xianxia did not come here, there would be no human figures, no animals, and not even a common plant. Under the blood-red light, even the omnipresent sounds of insects could not be found. Therefore, it was hard not to associate the figure that suddenly appeared in this place with something like a demon or a ghost. For White Lotus, that short moment felt like a particularly long and torturous time. Her hand seemed to stretch forward in a panic, but she did not look back. Suddenly, she let out a low shout, and her petite body suddenly flew forward. At the same time, she waved her hands backward with force. Then, the surrounding temperature suddenly dropped, and 2 icy snowstorms swept over and hit her back. Huh! The mysterious figure seemed to be surprised. Snow Wind Scripture. The Snow Wind Scripture was actually not very famous. In the world of cultivation, more than half of the people had never heard of this thing. However, in the hearts of those who knew about this thing, this Snow Wind Scripture was undoubtedly the most powerful thing in the world. The Snow Wind Scripture was undoubtedly related to Hakushin Jinkuan of the Kunlun party. In fact, before Hakushin Jinkuan, this Snow Wind Scripture had never appeared, so some people thought that perhaps Hakushin Jinkuan had created this Snow Wind Scripture. However, there were also people who privately thought that although Hakushin Jinkuan was very powerful, his and Lord Tianlan's master, Master Tianhong, was the truly amazing heaven's favored one, and most likely inherited it from their master. However, this mysterious and unfathomable Tao, art, and divine power seemed to have always had a bumpy fate. When perfected Lord Baichen was still alive, he did not teach his 2 eldest disciples, who had such great aptitudes. In the end, he only taught it to his last disciple, the young girl White Lotus, who was only about 10 years old. Now that he had passed away, White Lotus might be the last person in the world who knew such a powerful and strange Snow Wind Scripture. However, even though the Snow Wind Scripture was powerful, if one's cultivation was not enough, it would still be a tree without roots, a duckweed without roots. After the initial shock, the black figure swayed a few times. Although it seemed slow, it was actually very fast. In an instant, it flashed past the 2 snowstorms that looked like they could freeze a person's flesh and blood, and caught up with White Lotus. White Lotus felt a sharp aura locked onto her back like a blade. That feeling of uneasiness and danger grew stronger. In a moment of desperation, she was about to make another killing move when suddenly her vision blurred. That black figure appeared in front of her like a ghost. White Lotus was shocked, her body could not stop and crashed forward. But at this moment, her eyes suddenly flashed past a ferocious mask with a green face and long fangs. The person who appeared in front of her was wearing this mask. White Lotus's heart suddenly tightened. At that moment, she suddenly thought of a person, that person, although she had never seen him but she had heard of him countless times in Xianxia. Elder Ghost of the Evil Faction. Chapter 572. Lu Chen left the Kunlun Hall with Atsu. When he came out, he saw Old Ma standing alone outside the door. He walked over to Old Ma and greeted him from afar. Old Ma smiled and nodded as he walked over. "I thought you went back first," Lu Chen said to Old Ma with a smile. Old Ma smiled and shook his head. He glanced in the direction of the Kunlun Hall and then looked at Lu Chen with a questioning look. Lu Chen shook his head, indicating that there was nothing inside. Old Ma grunted in acknowledgement. Then, he said to Lu Chen, "Oh, by the way, Hall Master Shui from the Floating Clouds Division sent someone to look for you. He wants to invite you over to discuss something." Lu Chen was startled and said, "What did they say?" Old Ma said, "That's nothing, but I saw that the messenger who came just now looked normal. He didn't look anxious or anxious. I don't think it's anything urgent." Lu Chen nodded. Thinking that there was nothing urgent at the moment, he walked towards the Fuyunji Hall. Not long after, they arrived outside the Fuyunji Hall. After all, this place was not too far from the Kunlun Hall. Someone had already announced their arrival. Not long after, they politely invited Lu Chen and old Ma in with Shui Ying's orders. As for the black dog, it didn't follow them in. Recently, the dog didn't seem to like this kind of grand and spacious hall very much. It didn't want to go in easily, so it ran away on its own. Lu Chen and old Ma didn't care about this. The black dog was getting smarter and had a backer. No one on Mount Celestial Dragon would deliberately make things difficult for it, so it ran around freely. After a while, the two of them were brought to the living room of the Fuyunji Hall. Shuang sat there and waited. But what surprised Lu Chen and old Ma was that there was another person in the room. It was Chen He, who had been betrayed by Lu Chen from the devil cult. Logically speaking, there were many reasons why Chen He would betray the evil sect and attack his old master, but Lu Chen's role was undoubtedly at the top of the list. Without Lu Chen, Chen He might have died in Fuyunji's prison, and not become an honored guest of Fuyunji after betraying the devil cult. It was precisely because of this that Chen He spent most of his time by Lu Chen's side when he first defected, showing his loyalty to Lu Chen. In the eyes of outsiders, he was the new generation of Lu Chen's henchmen. However, for some unknown reason, after the Fuyun Company had schemed for a long time and finally dealt a heavy blow to the evil cult, almost completely uprooting this malignant tumor from the huge immortal city, Lu Chen, intentionally or unintentionally, began to distance himself from Chen He. Usually, they were just acquaintances who nodded at each other and did not really have the intention to accept him as a confidant. This was out of many people's expectations, including the leader of Fuyunji, Shuang, and Chen He himself. They all thought that Lu Chen would naturally expand his power. Shuang was very vigilant about this, and Chen He was very excited. He couldn't wait to become Lu Chen's core team. When Lu Chen truly inherited the foundation of Lord Tianlan, he would be able to soar to the sky. So, during that period of time, Chen He did everything possible to express goodwill to Lu Chen, and worked hard to leave a good impression on his future boss. Of course, the final result was not bad, but he did not catch Elder Ghost, so it was not perfect. Maybe it was because of this that Lu Chen hated him? Chen He could not help but think so. He was a defector, and in terms of experience and strength, he could not compare to the people on Fuyunji's side. In order to survive, there were almost no surprises in the choice he had to make next. He quickly approached Shuang, and after Shuang slightly relented and showed some intentions, he officially defected to her side. Seeing Lu Chen and old Ma walk in, Shuang and Chen He also stood up, a smile on their faces. Shui Ying's smile was calm and light, elegant and polite, while Chen He's smile was a little more enthusiastic, and he even took the initiative to greet Lu Chen and old Ma. Lu Chen also smiled, seemingly not minding Chen He's action of approaching Shuang. After exchanging a few words of modesty with him, Lu Chen smiled and sat down on his seat. He then smiled at Shuang and said, "Hall Master Shui, why have you called me here today?" Shuang nodded, not intending to beat around the bush, and said, "I heard that you plan to tell the true Lord that there is a lack of manpower in the Western continent to hunt down the remnants of the devil cult, so you want to send old Ma there?" Lu Chen's eyes flashed, but his expression did not change. Instead, it was old Ma who was sitting beside him who was faintly surprised, not quite understanding why Shuang suddenly brought this up. At this moment, Lu Chen said, "Yes, I have already mentioned this to Master, and wanted to send old Ma over. But Master said that the immortal city also needs a lot of manpower, and it is not appropriate to send too many people out, so he declined." Shuang nodded, looked at Lu Chen, and said with a smile, "It's like this, I invited junior brother Lu here today because there is something I want to tell you. The matter of hunting down the evildoers of the devil cult in the Western continent is indeed very important, and it is true that there is a lack of manpower there. So after thinking about it, I have decided to send Chen He over. He has been to the Western continent before, and has had a lot of contact with the local devil cult demons, so he is the best candidate for this task." Lu Chen and old Ma's expressions changed slightly, and then they looked at Chen He together. They saw Chen He smiling, as if nothing had happened. Lu Chen frowned, and he pondered deeply for a moment before he said, "You have to personally tell Master about this matter." I have already reported it to Lord True Lord." Shuang smiled and used a gentle voice to interrupt Lu Chen's words, and said, "He has approved." Lord True Lord Tianlan had approved Shui Ying's request. Lu Chen's expression changed again, and he could not help but look up at Shui Ying's smiling face. After a while, he said, "That is good." Then he turned to look at Chen He, and this time his face was full of smiles, and said, "There are a lot of evildoers in the Western continent. Brother Chen will have to work hard in the future." Chen He shook his head, and said with a smile, No, we are all working for Lord True Lord. For the sake of his grand plans, it is only our duty." Lu Chen and Old Ma looked at each other, and then looked away. The two sides chatted happily for a while, and then Lu Chen and Old Ma said goodbye, but they were very quiet on the road. After walking for a while, Old Ma lowered his voice, and asked, "Lord True Lord did not tell you about these things?" Lu Chen shook his head, and just as he was about to speak, he found that he and Old Ma had walked to the row of houses where the elite disciples of the Kunlun party were. Lu Chen was silent for a moment, and looked at the familiar house, and suddenly asked, "White Lotus is still living in Su Qingjuan's house, right?" Old Ma grunted, and was about to say something, when he suddenly saw someone coming from the road in front of them, and turned into the row of houses about 100 feet away from them. From afar, it was He, who they had not seen for a while. Old Ma frowned, and muttered, "That person's cultivation is not bad, he seems to have a fierce murderous aura." Chapter 573. He didn't seem to notice Lu Chen and Old Ma coming from afar. He turned into the back of the row of houses expressionlessly and soon disappeared. Lu Chen glanced at Old Ma. Old Ma thought for a moment and said, "He should also be living here." Among the group of people that the Kunlun party transferred here last time, Fuyunji has basically gathered and settled down. But I can't remember which room he lives in exactly now. Lu Chen nodded slightly and didn't say anything. In Kunlun sect, He was a proud son of heaven with boundless glory, an outstanding talent among the young generation of disciples, but after coming to the Immortal City, because the true Immortal Alliance had gathered the most outstanding talents in the world, not to mention others, there were 5 to 6 deity transformation stage perfected cultivators who stood at the peak of the human cultivation world, and there were even more nascent soul stage perfected cultivators. Who would pay special attention to one of the countless Jindan stage cultivators? In a place like the Immortal City where all the power and precious resources in the world were gathered, to a certain extent, the importance of the cultivation of an ordinary cultivator was much less than in other places. The people here were more used to looking at a person's background and identity to judge his strength. This was a kind of alienation, but also a kind of reality. For example, Lu Chen's cultivation and realm were obscure and hard to understand. On the surface, he might not be stronger than He, but in the Immortal City, his reputation was undoubtedly 100 times better than He's. Whether it was Lu Chen or Old Ma, they both had a lot of troubles at the moment, and He had never done anything out of line or eye-catching since he came to the Immortal City, so they didn't care about him. Because of the incident with He Gang, Lu Chen naturally had a kind of vigilance and alienation towards He, but now he didn't have any thoughts of targeting this person. The past was over, and the secrets were covered in dust. No one would ever mention the past again. Lu Chen shook his head slightly, tossing those memories aside. He then said to Old Ma in a low voice, "Just now in Fuyunji, you didn't show any dissatisfaction in front of Blood Warbler, did you?" Old Ma was startled. His expression turned solemn, and he recalled for a while with some seriousness. Then, he shook his head and said, "No, from the beginning to the end, I had a smile on my face. There was absolutely no anger or annoyance on my face." Lu Chen glanced at him, snorted coldly, and said, "So you are unhappy in your heart?" Old Ma rolled his eyes and said, "If it were you, would you still be happy? Of course not. Lu Chen admitted to this point very straightforwardly. Then, his expression darkened slightly as he said, Blood Warbler called Chen He over in front of us and purposely brought up this matter. Could it be that she's trying to show off to us? Recently, she has been getting more and more out of hand. Old Ma frowned. His first reaction was not to reply, but to look around first. Seeing that there was no one around them, only the two of them, he let out a sigh of relief. Then, he said in a low voice, even if you want to complain, let's find a safe place with no one to curse, okay? There is no one around here, Lu Chen said calmly. Otherwise, Atsu will find out. Atsu? Old Ma was shocked, and said, didn't it just run to? Before he finished speaking, Old Ma saw a dog's head poking out from the corner of a house in front of them. It glanced at them, and then yawned lazily. It was Atsu. Old Ma swallowed the words that he didn't want to say. He looked at Atsu and clicked his tongue. I've watched this dog grow up. He has changed so much. I don't know what he ate, but he seems to have become a demon. Old Ma was speechless. Lu Chen ignored Old Ma's praise for Atsu and just waved at Atsu. Old Ma saw this from the side, and subconsciously thought that Atsu would probably be like those legendary assassins who appeared and disappeared without a trace with a whoosh, and then suddenly jump out at a critical moment to deal a fatal blow. In the end, the black dog lay on the ground and buried its head between its two front paws. It looked like it was sunbathing and getting ready to sleep. Lu Chen's movement froze, and he cursed. It sounded like he was exasperated at Old Ma's failure to meet his expectations, but other than that, he did not express anything else. He pulled Old Ma and continued to walk forward, but he still lowered his voice. What are you thinking about? Old Ma was quite straightforward and said, right now, the entire Floating Clouds agency knows that I'm one of your people. However, True Monarch has prevented me from leaving, yet you've agreed to Blood Warbler's request. Isn't this somewhat inappropriate? Lu Chen was silent for a moment, and said, the damn Baldy has always been strange, and his actions are always unexpected. It is hard to say. After a pause, Lu Chen said, however, I have been in the limelight recently, and Shuang has been in charge of Fuyunji for many years. She has always been known as the #1 person under Tianlan. The damn Baldy probably did this because he weighed the pros and cons. Old Ma sighed and said, is he sacrificing a small fry like me to comfort the other side? Lu Chen glanced at him and said, don't talk nonsense about sacrifice. I didn't ask you to die. Old Ma smiled bitterly and said, fortunately, those big shots outside don't know about our little business. Otherwise, if they send someone to kill him, how are you going to defend yourself in front of perfected Immortal? Lu Chen also laughed and said, what's the big deal? I will just say that you did it. He patted Old Ma's shoulder and said with a smile, anyway, you are already dissatisfied. You have the motive, and we don't want to talk about the means. The murderer is you. Bah! Old Ma spat angrily, you are the most useless boss I have ever worked for. Lu Chen laughed. He sat in his room. The door was closed, the window was closed, and even the curtains were drawn, so the room was very dark and quiet. It was probably because of this that the hearty laughter from outside could be heard from afar, causing him to raise his head and look in the direction of the door. His face was still young and handsome. He was still high-spirited and had achievements that many people envied and yearned for. He dreamed that one day he could become the second Lu Chen, and then he would have no regrets in his life. But in He's heart, there was a lot of regret and hatred. In fact, sometimes he also had some doubts. His achievements were obviously good enough, but he was always not satisfied. He lowered his head. The dim light fell on his face, only illuminating half of his cheeks. He seemed to be sitting in the boundary between light and darkness. He seemed to be thinking, but also seemed to be hesitating. He was like a child standing on the edge of a cliff. In front of him was the most beautiful flower in the world, but below his feet was a bottomless abyss. Should he take this step? He slowly pulled out his long sword. The sword light reflected in his eyes, like a ghost in the dark. He didn't know how long he sat like this. It was quiet around him until the sky outside the room darkened and his room was completely plunged into darkness. Late at night. He slowly raised his head, stood up with his sword, and then opened the door and walked out. Chapter 574. In the dead of night, the wind blew from the northwest, bringing with it a bit of coldness. It circled above Mount Tianlong, letting out a mournful whine as it whizzed past. The night was dark and somber. Dark clouds covered the sky, and the usual moon and stars could not be seen. The trees on the mountain also seemed to be shivering in the wind. It was a dark and windy night. He walked silently in the shadows. His weapon had already been sheathed, and he was also dressed in a dark robe. He seemed to have blended in with the darkness, and it was almost impossible to notice that there was a figure quietly moving forward at the edge of the darkness. There was no trace of anyone around, but there were many buildings and pavilions in the distance. Those were the halls of Xianxia. Many of them were built tall and magnificent, and even in the dark night, they looked extraordinary. Like a giant in the day, like a giant beast in the night. However, in the dead of night, most of these places were dark and quiet. Even if one or two lights were lit occasionally, it was like the light of a firefly, shining faintly in the dark night, but not far away. He walked forward quietly. His face was expressionless. Although he looked young, he seemed to be faintly tired. However, his eyes were still as bright as ever, as if to prove that he had not given up on his first dream, and that he still had enthusiasm and yearning for the future. Although the road under his feet was longer than he had thought, he still had to walk until the final peak. Sometimes he would think that he would probably be able to breathe a sigh of relief on that day. His younger brother had died so early and so miserably. Now, he was the only one who could fulfill the wishes of the two brothers when they first climbed up Mount Kunlun. Even his younger brother's share had been completed together. The night wind was really a bit cold. Although he had already cultivated and was not afraid of this mere chill, he still seemed to pull at his clothes subconsciously. The surrounding night was like a wide layer of black gauze, protecting his whereabouts. His eyes were searching in the night, quietly moving towards a predetermined direction. That place should not be too far away, and he was almost there. For some reason, he suddenly became a little distracted. At that moment, he suddenly felt that he seemed to be like a mysterious figure in the past, a shadow. Those mysterious shadows that belonged to Fuyunji. Fuyunji was the most powerful hall in Xianxia, and those mysterious and strange shadows hidden in the dark were its most terrifying power. There were many kinds of shadows, but in the eyes of outsiders, there were two kinds that were the most terrifying. One was the killer, and the other was the spy. An assassin in the darkness could kill anyone, but an insider would destroy everything that was originally as firm as a rock. What's more, in the legends, the things hidden in the depths of the floating clouds agency, the most terrifying shadows, had already combined these two identities into one. It was said that the once prosperous devil cult, the powerful devil cult that once fought against the orthodox cultivation world, was destroyed by such a shadow. He felt the chill on his body getting heavier. All the shadows in Fuyunji belonged to the high and mighty Lord Tianlan. It was precisely because of such terrifying power and his unfathomable strength that Lord Tianlan could become the world's most powerful person today. He suddenly thought of Lu Chen. Of course, he was not unfamiliar with that person. In the past, he had several disputes with this person, and even in the depths of the southern land of chaos, he once killed this person and knocked him out of Longchuan. Of course, he thought that this person was already dead, and he was very proud to repay Lord Tianlan, looking forward to using this merit to move the Divine Transformation Lord's heart, so that he would accept him as a disciple. In the end, none of this happened. He used to be very confused, but a few years later, on Mount Celestial Dragon, he saw with his own eyes the scene of Lord Tianlan accepting Lu Chen as a disciple. His face was calm, but at that moment, his heart was completely filled with despair. After all, the world was full of malice towards people like him who struggled to become immortal. In order to please Lord Tianlan, after a painful struggle, he did not hesitate to kill his master and Dukanjinren, who had raised him into a talent. Until today, he often saw the look his master gave him before he died, and then woke up with a cold sweat all over his body. In the same way, in order to please the bald lord, he spared no effort to hunt him down for thousands of miles, but in the end, not only did he end up in vain, but Tianlan actually accepted Lu Chen as a disciple? What did this mean? It was clear that there was some kind of secret relationship between them a long time ago, but he had been hiding it from him. At the moment when he saw the apprenticeship ceremony, he had never felt the pain of being fooled and humiliated like this. He felt that every smile of the master and disciple was aimed at him, with coldness and ridicule that went deep into his bones. His loyalty to Tianlan and his attachment to Kunlun were silently shattered at that moment. He knew that he had no future in the power of Lord Tianlan, and sooner or later, there would only be an unexpected disaster and an accidental death waiting for him. Even until now, neither Tianlan nor Lu Chen took any action against him. Because he asked himself honestly, if he were in Tianlan's position, he would definitely not let go of an enemy who tried to kill him. He had no way to go, and there was no place for him to retreat. He had to fight to the death. He looked up and saw the house. He came here, to the last destination of the night. In the silent night, the night that enveloped Sky Dragon Mountain was the same as usual. At the beginning, there was no difference, until suddenly, in a hall in the night, a shrill scream rang out. That scream was sharp and resounding, and seemed to carry some anger and doubt. But then, another angry and crisp voice rang out, resounding through the nearby mountains. In the dark night, in a moment, many lights were lit up. In some places that reacted quickly, there were already people holding torches and rushing out, approaching the place where the scream came from. However, before the crowd could get close, there was a sudden change in the dark night. A bright and dazzling firework suddenly shot up into the sky with a shrill scream, shooting straight into the vault of heaven, blossoming with unparalleled dazzling light, and then exploded with a loud bang in the sky. Like a sudden clap of thunder, it caused the mountains to shake, and immediately startled the entire Sky Dragon Mountain. For a moment, in the near and far, countless lights were lit up. It was unknown how many people were awakened from their dreams, and then raised their eyes to look at the sky. When they saw the firework that turned into a brilliant rain of flowers slowly falling from the sky, some were stunned, some were doubtful, and some suddenly changed their expressions. After a moment, suddenly, a low, old voice that seemed to contain infinite power suddenly rang out in the night sky, as if a god had descended, causing the wind and clouds to roll. "How dare you? Who dares to bully my, Tai-Hu's daughter?" The mountains shook, and the heavens and the earth were shocked. Chapter 575. Mount Tianlong was the location of the headquarters of Zhengxianmeng. As the #1 rich and powerful organization in the world and the leader of the righteous path, this place had become the center of the world of cultivation, like the capital of a dynasty. Many cultivators, including the immortal city at the foot of the mountain, yearned for this place, flocked from all directions and gathered here. There were 6 deity stage cultivators in this huge mountain range, and the rest of the Yuanying, Jin Dan, and Foundation establishment cultivators were innumerable. Therefore, when the thunderous roar suddenly resounded in the sky, the entire celestial dragon mountain seemed to have been jolted awake from a dream of the dark night and woke up in an instant. Looking from a distance, one could clearly see many light spots swaying between the mountain peaks, and it was obvious that they were moving and gathering in the direction of the accident. Further away, one could vaguely see the residences of several other big shots. There didn't seem to be much movement, but the lights were also lit up, as if they were watching the situation from afar. Under the sky, in the boundless night, an indescribably powerful force fell from the sky, landing on the top of the pavilion that did not look particularly majestic. At this time, many people had quickly gathered in the nearby mountains. Most of them were awakened and came to watch the show, or some had some other thoughts. In addition, there was a group of people dressed neatly and in the same style. They were the people of Tianlai Hall. Compared to the other unorganized and somewhat disorderly idlers, the actions of the Heavenly Law Hall side were obviously much more decisive. After all, the one who had bellowed earlier was the boss of the Heavenly Law Hall, true monarch Jianghu. Therefore, it did not take long before the elite troops of the Heavenly Law Hall, which seemed to have at least 100 people, had already passed through the crowd and tightly surrounded the small building that had a signboard with the words Tingyu Building written on it. At the same time, on the top of this small building, a person was floating in the void, with a powerful momentum, an angry face, and a slightly low cultivation that made people dare not look directly at him. It was the leader of Tianlai Hall, Immortal Jianghu. In the distance, there were more people rushing over in the night. It was not that these people were fools who did not know that mortals would avoid a fight between immortals, but this was where the headquarters of Zhengxianmeng was located. How could there be a powerful enemy who dared to come here? Seriously, in such a place, deity stage Immortal Jianghu had some scruples, and the incident happened suddenly. Everyone had to take a few more glances and gather more information, which was beneficial without harm. Maybe in the future, when the big shots in their own mountains asked, they would have something to say. Well, the above were all superficial words. Nowadays, the devil cult had been suppressed, and the true immortal alliance had unified the world. Who would dare to provoke them? Everyone had nothing to do anyway, so they all came over to watch a good show. Furthermore, the deity transformation stage perfected cultivator's words seemed to imply that the beautiful Song Wenji seemed to have been bullied. There was no lack of smart people in this world. There was no such thing as an impenetrable wall in this world. Rumors, gossip, and the like never stopped on this celestial dragon mountain. It was just that because of various reasons, it could not be put out in the open. But how could some shady matters in private be completely hidden from people? Therefore, more and more people were curious, excited, and ran over. And those with deep minds had already taken this opportunity to secretly think if there were any opportunities that could be used. Father, the Tingyu building, which was tightly surrounded by the crowd, suddenly came a cry from the inside of the building, which seemed to be tight on the inside but loose on the outside. A moment later, a female figure opened the door of the building and staggered out. The flashing light shone on the woman, and there was a sudden commotion in the crowd. Many people even cried out involuntarily. The person who ran out was Song Wenji. However, her current appearance was a little embarrassing. Her originally charming face had lost all color, and her clothes were in a mess. There were a few places where her clothes were torn, revealing her snow-white shoulders and some skin on her chest. Under the light of the fire, she looked haggard and heart-wrenching, but faintly, she had a different kind of charm and beauty. After the hubbub, the crowd soon quieted down again. Some quick-witted people had already gasped and subconsciously looked up at the night sky. Sure enough, Immortal Jianghu, who saw this scene in mid-air, was so angry that his whole body trembled. His voice was like thunder as he shouted, "Shameless scum, so bold for lust. Quickly come out and accept your death." At that moment, many people looked at the Tingyu building, only to see that there was no candlelight inside. It was pitch black, and they could not see clearly who was inside. However, everyone's eyes were filled with surprise and curiosity. They thought to themselves, how could there be such an ignorant person on Mount Tianlong who doesn't know what's good for him? How dare he touch the exclusive property of a deity transformation stage immortal? Seeing Immortal Jianghu stamping with rage in mid-air, in such a situation, unless the other 5 deity transformation stage immortals came out, there should be no one who could protect the life of the extremely bold perverted thief in the building. As for whether the other 5 deity transformation stage immortals would come out or not, there was no need to think about it. Definitely not. For such a thing to come out, how could a true immortal keep his face? Song Wenji cried bitterly at Immortal Jianghu in mid-air, kneeling on the ground and shaking her shoulders, looking very painful and sad. However, at some point in time, her eyes still swept across the crowd in the distance from the corner of her eyes. Then, she quickly saw a certain person in the crowd, as well as the few expert guards who quietly followed behind that person to protect him. She withdrew her gaze and continued to cry, as if she was really very sad. He looked at the road under his feet. The darkness of the night covered everything, making the road in front of him look very blurry. Just a little bit further and it completely blended into the darkness, as if there was no way to go, but also as if there were countless possibilities, luring him to take that step. The sound of hurried footsteps had already gone far away, and the guards who were set up to protect that person naturally followed. The person who was quietly squatting in the shadows outside the house slowly stood up, like an evil ghost quietly crawling out of the night. The road under his feet was neither long nor short, it was still the same as before, but the person walking had changed. If he turned back now, would it still be too late? This last thought flashed across He's mind, and then he silently shook his head, expressionlessly smiling bitterly to himself in his heart. This world was so cruel, when had it ever given people like him so many choices? Since he had decided, he should go, there was no turning back. He pulled out his sword, reflecting a cold light in the night, and then stepped out. In 2 or 3 steps, he reached the side of the wall, and then jumped over. Landing noiselessly, in front of him was the bedroom in the backyard, one of which was still lit, not knowing if it had been awakened by the movement just now. He quietly walked to the bedroom door, and heard a child call out softly from inside. "Mother, I'm so sleepy." There was a gentle female voice hurriedly comforting him, with a bit of love and warmth. He could even feel the taste of beauty and happiness from it. He slightly lowered his head, looking at the long sword in his hand. The night wind was cold, blowing through his clothes and hair. His hand faintly trembled, but very quickly steadied. After a moment, he took a deep breath, gritted his teeth, and went forward to gently push the door. With a low creak, the door slowly opened. Chapter 576. Lu Chen and Old Ma lived together. Of course, there was also a black dog. They had a good sleep that night, but were awakened by the explosion of fireworks on the mountain and the thunderous voice of Immortal Jianghu. It was rare for a perfected cultivator of the divine transformation realm to be so angry. Not to mention that it was rarely seen, it probably would not happen once in a decade or two. Therefore, when Lu Chen and Old Ma figured out what had happened on the mountain, they were both shocked. However, after staying for a long time in the true immortal alliance where undercurrents were surging and scheming against each other, they naturally, as if instinctively, immediately thought of more things. Lu Chen frowned and thought for a while, then asked Old Ma, when was the last time an old man of the divine transformation realm got angry in public like this? Old Ma pondered for a while, then shook his head and said, "I can't remember." Lu Chen glanced at him, and Old Ma asked, "Do you want to go up the mountain to have a look?" Lu Chen hesitated for a moment and said, "Let's go there. It's already like this, and things will definitely get out of hand. What's the use of not going there? We have to understand what happened." Of course, this was reasonable, and Old Ma also nodded in agreement. In addition, there was another reason that they did not say out loud. In fact, they both knew in their hearts that although there were a lot of outstanding cultivators in Zhengxianmeng, most of them still belonged to the top few perfected cultivators of the divine transformation realm, and there were many conflicts between them. They were important figures in perfected cultivator Tianlan's faction, and it was not appropriate for them to stay out of this at this time. If perfected cultivator Tianlan asked them about this in the future, it would be very bad if they could not say anything. Therefore, the two brought Atsu, who had just been woken up and seemed a little unhappy and depressed, to Mount Celestial Dragon. The night was still very dark, but the startled people on Mount Celestial Dragon soon woke up. On the way, Lu Chen and old Ma saw many torches and more figures. Obviously, many people had the same mentality as them. After all, this was a soul formation perfected Lord's show. It would be a waste not to watch it. Regardless of whether it was useful in the future, he would have something to brag about. Therefore, when Lu Chen and old Ma rushed to the rain-listening building at the fastest speed, the small building had already been tightly surrounded by numerous people. Lu Chen pulled on old Ma, and the two of them climbed up a big tree on the other side. Anyway, there were many people in the dark, so there was nothing to be ashamed of. However, the troublesome thing was that after they climbed up the tree, they found that the tree was already full of people. It seemed that everyone in the world was the same. Even cultivators couldn't change their curiosity and love to watch the fun. Finally squeezing out 2 places to stand, Lu Chen and old Ma were happy and immediately looked forward. As for Atsu, he didn't want to join in the fun with these stupid humans. He just lay under the tree, yawning and looking sleepy. Song Wenji. After seeing the situation in front of the rain-listening building clearly, Lu Chen was startled and said with a little astonishment. Old Ma also recognized the woman who was kneeling in front of the rain-savoring building and crying very sadly. He also clearly saw Song Wenji's somewhat messy and torn clothes. Suddenly, his complexion changed slightly. Then, he glanced at the extremely frightening figure with a monstrous aura floating in the sky. He lowered his voice and said, "Which idiot dares to touch this woman on this mountain?" Lu Chen nodded and also showed a puzzled expression. He frowned and kept looking at the rain-listening building. Suddenly, Jianghu real lord shouted again in mid-air, angrily said, "Perverted thief! Still not coming out to die? You dare to do it but don't dare to admit it?" Everyone's eardrums were buzzing from this big shot's angry shout, and they were all shocked. Almost all the people present were cultivators, and there was no lack of cultivators who had cultivated for many years. But at a glance, almost everyone's expression changed. It was conceivable that the cultivation of a deity transformation stage immortal was really unfathomable. However, from the beginning until now, aside from Song Wenji running out of the building in tears, there was actually no movement from inside. It was unknown if the so-called pervert was scared out of his wits by the soul formation true monarch and didn't dare to come out. But everyone knew that in this situation, with Immortal Jianghu blocking this small building, unless there were other deity transformation stage immortals coming out, otherwise, looking at Immortal Jianghu's furious look, there would definitely be blood splattered on the spot today. As for whether you came out or not, it didn't matter at all. Now it was just that Immortal Jianghu was unwilling to take action because of his status, but later on he would be impatient and tear down this small building, which was just a small effort. Sure enough, Immortal Jianghu who was in mid-air, not knowing whether he was provoked by the person in the small building below, or seeing Song Wenji's pitiful appearance, after a shout, he flipped his palm. Suddenly, a huge palm shadow appeared in the sky and directly hit down on the rain-listening building. In front of the rain-listening building, Song Wenji exclaimed and covered her body with her clothes, but her feet were not slow, and she lightly dodged. Thus, under the astonished gazes of everyone, the gigantic palm image landed with a loud bang. With a ka sound, the small building was directly crushed down as if it was a piece of rotten wood, and with a loud bang, it turned into a pile of broken wood and ruins. It was crushed just like that? There was no sound from the person inside until now? If there was really someone inside, and if his cultivation was not strong enough, he probably was already dead? Outside the rain-listening building, a large number of people were dumbfounded. Everyone knew that Immortal Jianghu was very angry now, but no one expected that this old man would actually make such a heavy move. Lu Chen suddenly heard several gasps around him, and even his expression changed slightly. This move was indeed very powerful, but everyone had seen the world. Although they were usually very respectful of deity transformation stage immortals, they were not completely frightened by this move. Most of the people who could stand here today were those who could survive in Zhengxiameng, and how many of them were fools? In a rage, he killed with one blow, and the murderer did not even have a chance to appeal. Who knew what was going on in the rain-listening building in the dark? Everyone only saw Song Wenji's tattered clothes, but there were all kinds of strange things in Zhengxiameng, so who knew what was going on in the rain-listening building? Everyone was silent. After a while, suddenly they heard the elites of the Heavenly Law Hall in the innermost part of the crowd loudly praising. What they said was nothing more than praising Immortal Jianghu for eliminating evil for the people, upholding justice, and so on. The people on the outside looked at each other in dismay, no one answered. After a while, True Lord Taihu landed back on the ground and stood beside Song Wenji. Song Wenji let out a cry and threw herself into his arms, crying non-stop. Immortal Jianghu showed a loving expression and comforted her in a low voice, "It's okay, it's okay." At this time, someone had already gone to check and clean the ruins of the rain-listening building. The surrounding people all looked over there, wondering who was so unlucky in the building. Lu Chen was watching attentively, and suddenly felt Old Ma pulling him. He turned his head and asked in a low voice, "What's wrong?" Old Ma did not speak, and only pointed at their feet, which was the bottom of the big tree, with his mouth. Lu Chen looked down and saw that He was standing beside Atsu at some point in time. Of course he knew Atsu, so he was looking around, seemingly looking for Lu Chen, but of course he did not find him. After a while, he seemed to think of something, and looked up. Lu Chen and Old Ma waved to him. He smiled and nodded to them with a gentle expression. Lu Chen smiled back, and at the same time his eyes swept over He's back. He could see 2 or 3 figures standing in the shadows, neither far nor near, following He all the time. He smiled and did not say anything. At this time, there was a sudden commotion in front, and someone shouted in the ruins. They found a person, or to be exact, a dead person. Chapter 577. After greeting each other, Lu Chen, Old Ma, and He remained standing on the tree. Everyone looked away. Lu Chen had no intention of going down, and he did not show any signs of climbing up the tree. After standing for a while, he seemed to feel that this was not a good place, so he walked to the side and quickly walked into the crowd on the other side. The seemingly ordinary figures behind him also followed him like shadows. Seeing that those people had gone far away, Old Ma softly snorted. Lu Chen frowned and said, "What's wrong?" Old Ma said, "This person's ambition is not small. He is not willing to be under someone else for long. He may become a disaster in the future." Lu Chen laughed and turned to look at Old Ma. He said, "I didn't expect you to have mastered the mind-reading skill. Come, tell me, how did you see through it in the blink of an eye?" Old Ma said seriously, "We are standing on this branch, but he feels uncomfortable under it and would rather walk away. It is obvious that he is dissatisfied." Lu Chen shook his head with a smile and said, "Don't tell me that you're holding a grudge against him because he snatched something good from you?" "Of course I don't think much of him." Old Ma calmly admitted it. However, there was a solemn expression on his face as he said, "It doesn't matter how he treats me. However, given your current status, if he abandons you and joins Shuang, not only will he not be punished, he will even be given great things. What will others think if they see this?" Lu Chen was silent for a moment, then said with a slightly self-deprecating tone, "They probably think that I have fallen out of favor with that damn Baldy?" Old Ma snorted coldly and did not say anything. When they met by chance just now, both sides were very polite and friendly. But everyone could also feel that the atmosphere between the two was different from before. After he was forced by Lu Chen to join Zhengxiameng's side, he could be considered a person who knew when to pick up and when to let go. He immediately joined Lu Chen's faction and worked hard for him. He also paid special attention to the matter of hunting down the evil sect. To put it nicely, it was abandoning the dark for the light. To put it bluntly, it was probably turning against him. Of course, Lu Chen's plan had pushed him too far and made him a mortal enemy of the evil sect. He did not have much choice. But now that time had passed, he only seemed to be friendly towards Lu Chen on the surface. Just now when he was under the tree, he even seemed a little unhappy when he raised his head to look at him. Then, if he achieved something in the future and had power and influence, when he faced Lu Chen, would he remember that Lu Chen had also plotted against him? It's so damn hard to live well in this broken place like Xianxia, Lu Chen suddenly cursed. Old Ma sighed at the side, patted his shoulder with his hand, and then said in a low and sympathetic tone, I understand how you feel, and I sympathize with you. Don't talk nonsense, the whole Sky Dragon Mountain knows that you and I are best friends. If others want to deal with me, they will probably kill you first before killing me. Lu Chen very politely interrupted Old Ma's comfort. Old Ma's expression changed greatly, and then he also cursed something like, what the hell? But these two people were people who had been in this damn Xianxia for many years, so they quickly put aside those boring and useless emotions and began to discuss the solution later. Looking at your sneaky and thoughtful look, you must have come up with some evil idea in your mind, right? Lu Chen looked at Old Ma and said seriously. Old Ma looked at Lu Chen with contempt, and then said, the things you have done are much more ruthless than me. Anyway, since things have come to this, why not make the first move? Lu Chen didn't think much and shook his head, saying, behave yourself these days, don't mess around. Old Ma frowned and said, when he really goes far away and goes to the western continent, it will be difficult to deal with. Lu Chen said lightly, we haven't really reached the point where we are enemies of life and death. Let's wait and see, no hurry. Moreover, the Immortal Alliance has not been peaceful recently, let's wait and see first. As he said this, he seemed to think of something and looked up at the dark night sky above his head. Old Ma also seemed to understand what he meant. After a moment of silence, he also nodded and seemed to agree with Lu Chen's idea. But he still seemed to be a little unwilling. After smacking his lips twice, he suddenly said, anyway, seeing him like a villain intoxicated by success makes me uncomfortable. If I knew this day would come, I would have let that little girl White Lotus teach him a little more. By the way, I haven't seen White Lotus for a while, do you know where she went? Lu Chen said indifferently, I didn't see her either. Maybe she is still staying in Su Qingjuan's room and is too lazy to go out. Well, there seems to be a dead person carried out over there. TSK, his whole body is so soft, even his bones are broken. A deity severing is really powerful, but to be able to do this, hey. The atmosphere in the vicinity of the rain-savoring building on the celestial Dragon Mountain had always been a little weird. Though nobody stood out to openly question Immortal Jianghu or say anything else, all the cheers and rebukes were from the people of Heavenly Law Hall, which sounded a little weird. Fortunately, Immortal Jianghu did not have the intention to be entangled here any longer. He casually said a few words like, the perverted thief is extremely daring, provoking the Tai Sui, seeking his own death. He then brought along the beautiful and sorrowful Song Wenji and left. After this big shot left, the scene suddenly became lively. Many people squeezed forward, wanting to see who the dead person was and that there were other clues in the rain-savoring building that had been turned into ruins from time to time, so that they could find out what had happened before. That's right, even though Immortal Jianghu personally appeared to punish them and intimidate everyone, the intelligent people of the true Immortal Alliance who were used to seeing crafty plots and conspiracies still didn't really believe it on this point. Even a deity transformation stage immortal couldn't suppress his curiosity and guess. It could be seen that this was the usual atmosphere. However, although Taihu Immortal had left, the people of Heavenly Law Hall still surrounded the place and kept the corpse. Some people were dissatisfied and shouted in the crowd to show everyone which idiot had eaten a bear's heart and a leopard's heart to dare to provoke the young miss of the Heavenly Law Hall. However, the Heavenly Law Hall just turned a blind eye and directly left. The onlookers were naturally full of doubts. They only felt that the incident tonight seemed to be full of strangeness, and that something was not quite right. But since it had come to this, everyone could only gradually disperse. Lu Chen and old Ma brought Atu, who looked like he had almost fallen asleep again, back to where they came from. While they were discussing this matter in a low voice, they suddenly heard an extremely sharp howl coming from another place on the heavenly dragon mountain. The faces of Lu Chen and old Ma changed at the same time. The direction from which the sound came was from Fuyunji, and it sounded like an extremely urgent alarm signal. Chapter 578. The large group of people who were about to disperse, those who were walking in the light and those who were about to disappear into the darkness, suddenly paused. It was as if someone had suddenly cast an unfathomable Dao technique and divine ability, and all the sounds were instantly erased. Everyone turned their heads and looked in the direction of the shrill alarm, which was also the direction of Fuyunji, and even Kunlun Temple, which had recently become very popular on Mount Tianlong. Lu Chen and old Ma looked at each other, and their expressions changed. The level of the alarm in Fuyunji was not low. Something big must have happened. Why is it so unpeaceful tonight? What happened in Fuyunji? Old Ma could not help but complain to Lu Chen in a low voice. Lu Chen also shook his head with a hint of caution on his face. He frowned as he looked at the gradually brightening Fuyunji's territory in the distance, and there were more lights gradually gathering in that direction. No matter what, the two of them were on the same side as Fuyunji and Lord Tianlan, so it was reasonable for them to go back and take a look. After getting down from the tree, they called Atsu and rushed to Fuyunji Temple. There were many people along the way. Obviously, they had heard the noise and ran there. Lu Chen walked quickly as he looked around. He saw that there were familiar faces and unfamiliar faces, but most of them had grave expressions. It was as if they were deeply worried about the floating clouds company, or if they didn't do so, they wouldn't be able to express their goodwill. However, who would know what was really in other people's hearts? Maybe some people were burning with anxiety, maybe some people were gloating, and maybe some people just wanted to look on coldly, not caring about the big or small disasters, and only seeing if there was a chance to gain benefits. There must be all kinds of such things. For a moment, Lu Chen suddenly felt that it was a little funny. The alliance of true immortals commanded the world and was majestic. It looked extraordinary on the surface, but the people who were really in the core of the alliance of true immortals were probably already used to scheming against each other. Not knowing if it was because Lu Chen had been silent, old Ma was a little anxious. He approached him a little nervously. First, he looked around to make sure that no one was too close, and then he said in a very low voice that only Lu Chen could hear, "Could it be that something happened to Lord Xianxia?" Lu Chen's footsteps suddenly stopped, and his expression changed. His sudden stop startled old Ma and Atsu. Old Ma saw that he didn't look good and quickly said, "I'm just guessing. Don't take it seriously. I'm just afraid that." Lu Chen shook his head slightly. After a moment of silence, he said, "I don't blame you." Speaking of this, he paused for a moment, and then said calmly, "I can't think of anyone who can secretly plot against a person like the damn Baldy. He should be fine." Old Ma replied with a It seemed that he had no objection to Lu Chen's words. His expression relaxed, and then he strode forward. Lu Chen followed him, looking at old Ma's back with a somewhat complicated expression. When old Ma suddenly asked him this question just now, to be honest, he had never thought that something might happen to Lord Tianlan when the alarm sounded. But at that moment, his heart suddenly beat faster in his chest. Why was that? Was he worried, or was he expecting something? His sober reason had always firmly controlled his body and will, so that he knew what was the right thing to do. But in his mind and in the depths of his heart, had he ever thought about that kind of secret freedom? Had he really hoped that person would die? Lu Chen looked at the hall that was getting closer and closer and gradually showing its outline, and suddenly quickened his pace. As the most powerful hall in Zhengxianmeng, Fuyunji did not get its reputation by bragging. Its efficiency and strength were actually far better than other mountain forces. Therefore, when these people just arrived near the edge of Fuyunji's territory, they found that the situation here was not quite the same as in the rain-savoring tower. The people of Fuyunji had completely controlled the surroundings. They were heavily guarded, and the atmosphere was somber. Everyone was blocked outside. Those outsiders were blocked by the stern-looking and solemn guards of Fuyunji. Although they were dissatisfied, everyone could see that something serious must have happened in Fuyunji's territory at the moment. If there was a dispute, the arrogant soldiers of Fuyunji would not be polite and show mercy. And those who belonged to Fuyunji were quickly recognized or reported their identities. Then, they were quickly summoned and distributed to various places in an orderly manner, further strengthening the defense around Fuyunji. Therefore, this territory became more and more stable. In the dark, a large group of people were blocked outside, sticking their heads out and looking around in the silent and somber atmosphere. It was completely different from the situation in the rain-savoring tower. Lu Chen and Old Ma rushed here. After they came forward and showed their identities, they were quickly let in. With Lu Chen's identity, he was now one of the 3 core figures under Supreme Tianlan. His future was limitless. Therefore, everyone thought highly of him and naturally would not let him do the work of guarding. Lu Chen led Old Ma and Atsu directly through the crowd. Under the guidance and whispers of the people next to him, they went to the place where the incident happened. Old Ma followed him and heard a few words. His expression slowly changed into a complicated and shocked expression, and even the corners of his eyes were slightly twitching. Lu Chen kept a sullen face and did not speak. He walked quickly through the main hall of Fuyunji, but did not go in the direction of the Kunlun Hall. Instead, he took a detour in another direction. The night there looked particularly deep and dark. The wind blew from the front, carrying with it a faint smell of blood. After walking for a while, they could vaguely see a house there. There were already many people surrounding it, and there were many familiar faces among them, including Xueying and the other top figures of the Floating Clouds division. At this moment, they were all here. Lu Chen walked over with large strides. Hearing his footsteps, Xueying turned her head and glanced in his direction. When she saw Lu Chen, her charming face was as cold as ice, but she didn't show any hostility towards him. She only nodded slightly, which could be considered a greeting. Lu Chen walked to her side and was about to speak when they suddenly heard a beast-like howl from behind them. It sounded like a man's heart-wrenching cry. There was also a low sound, as if someone inside had lost control and hit the wall or knocked over something. A few fires lit up in the dark house. A commotion came, and a few voices gathered together. It seemed like they had spent a lot of effort to suppress the person who had lost control. Lu Chen and Xueying both looked over there. The wind blew past them, carrying with it a strong smell of blood. It was nauseating. Lu Chen lowered his head slightly. After a moment of silence, he opened his mouth and asked, inside. Xueying's expression was solemn. She sighed softly and said in a low voice, "Very tragic." Lu Chen did not speak. The woman in front of him had seen more of the world than him. If even she said the word "very tragic," there was a moment when Lu Chen did not even want to enter this house. However, Xueying looked at him. For some reason, her gaze was somewhat deep. She said, "Shall we go in and take a look?" Lu Chen frowned and looked at her. His heart sank slightly. After a moment, he nodded and said, "Okay, let's go in and take a look." Chapter 579. Before entering the house, Lu Chen turned around and glanced at Old Ma, who was standing behind him. Atsu was also standing beside Old Ma. However, this black dog was no longer as lazy and sleepy as before. Instead, its eyes were sharp and fierce. It stared at the house with a murderous look, as if it wanted to eat someone alive. He didn't know if it was stimulated by the strong smell of blood that drifted in the wind. Old Ma also looked at Lu Chen. His expression was solemn, but there was a hint of worry and anxiety in the depths of his eyes. Lu Chen shook his head slightly. Old Ma was startled for a moment, but then nodded in acknowledgement. After this short silent exchange, Lu Chen turned around and said to Xueying, "Let's go." Xueying did not say anything and walked into the house first. Lu Chen followed half a step behind her. However, just as they were about to enter the door, Lu Chen suddenly heard a few low roars from Atsu behind him. Lu Chen's body paused. He turned around to look, and his expression changed slightly. He saw that Old Ma and Atsu were still standing in the same place. However, there were now 4 or 5 people around them. There was originally no one around them, but now there were 4 or 5 people around them. They seemed to be very loose, and there was no obvious hostility. However, it was true that they had surrounded them in the middle. Old Ma's expression did not change, as if he did not feel anything. However, Atsu did not hold back. They growled fiercely at the few Fuyunji people who were still a distance away from them. Lu Chen was silent for a moment. His expression was already somewhat gloomy. He turned around to look at Xueying and said, "Hall Master Xue, what is the meaning of this?" Xueying's expression was calm, as if she did not see anything out of the ordinary. She only said softly, "They do not have any ill intentions. It is just that this is an emergency. There must be some suspicious people. Let's just watch for now. There will be no problems." As she said this, she smiled slightly and her expression softened. In this disgusting and bloody night, she was like a beautiful flower that was pleasing to the eye, pleasing to the eye. She stretched out her hand and gestured for them to enter. She calmly smiled and said, "Let's go in and have a look. It is fine outside." Lu Chen looked at this beautiful and famous woman. He stood motionless with an indifferent expression. It was as if he had suddenly become deaf and did not hear what Xueying had just said. Of course, the two of them were not the only ones present. Other than Old Ma, Atsu and a few people near them, Fuyunji's elite troops had already tightly surrounded this house. There were even more people at the main entrance. Although no one was too close to the two leaders, Xueying and Lu Chen, their every move and word was observed by the surrounding people. Therefore, at that moment, when Lu Chen suddenly disregarded Xueying's words rudely, the atmosphere at the scene suddenly seemed to become cold. The originally somewhat tense surroundings immediately looked over. On the stone steps, Lu Chen indifferently looked at Xueying. He did not take a step, did not move, and did not have any intention of speaking. Sometimes, not speaking actually had another meaning. Perhaps it was to express dissatisfaction. Xueying's expression also changed slightly. It seemed that she did not expect Lu Chen to disregard her words in front of so many people at this critical moment. Moreover, he was clearly looking at her with some provocation. This situation was clearly a little awkward. Xueying felt that she was in a difficult position. She waited for a while, then slowly retracted her extended hand. She then said indifferently, "What is it? Junior Lu, do you have any dissatisfaction with me?" Lu Chen shook his head and said, "I dare not. Hallmaster Xue's reputation is illustrious and her words carry enormous weight. She can do whatever she wants. She can say that whoever she wants is a suspect. She can detain and surround whoever she wants. How could I dare to be dissatisfied with such power?" He said these words very clearly and loudly. In front of the main entrance of the house, who knew how many people in the open and in the dark heard these words clearly at the same time. For a moment, there was silence all around. This was probably the first time that the two great figures under Supreme Tianlan, who had always lived in harmony, suddenly erupted into a conflict. In the past many years, Xueying had been the leader of Fuyunji. She was loyal and devoted to Supreme Tianlan, and she was able to lead Fuyunji. She led this powerful and vicious force to fight against the devil cult for many years. Until now, she had almost completely defeated the devil cult and made great achievements. Before Lu Chen appeared, or more accurately, before Supreme Tianlan suddenly held a disciple acceptance ceremony and accepted Lu Chen as his only disciple, Xueying was fully deserving of being Supreme Tianlan's #1 confidant. After that disciple acceptance ceremony, who knew how many people on Mount Celestial Dragon and in Zhengxiameng were watching Fuyunji and Xueying? They were full of interest to see how this woman would react. After all, in terms of status, the person who was most likely to inherit Supreme Tianlan's great legacy had suddenly changed from her to the man called Lu Chen. This was a bitter fruit, and it was almost impossible to swallow. Perhaps a conflict was inevitable, but to everyone's surprise, Xueying seemed to have no objections, or rather, she accepted everything without any change in expression. During the disciple acceptance ceremony, she followed behind Supreme Tianlan with a smile, doing everything she was supposed to do. On normal days, she and Lu Chen coordinated and adapted to each other, and finally destroyed the last of the devil cult's forces in the Immortal City. No one could not help but praise her, and they could not help but sigh at how unfathomable this woman's thoughts were. Until today, she seemed to have finally begun to lose her patience. Facing Lu Chen's somewhat unexpected provocation, she seemed to no longer have the good attitude she had in the past. Junior brother Lu. Xueying's voice also carried a bit of coldness. She said indifferently, "I don't understand what you're saying. I'm just doing things according to the rules. Now that something has happened in this house, the investigation naturally has to first investigate the suspect and motive. What's wrong with that? Is it worth it for you to humiliate me like this?" She looked at Lu Chen, and straightened her back and waist. Just like how she had walked through this dangerous world of men for so many years, she was proud and fearless. She said in a clear voice, "Looks like, it's not that I've done anything wrong, but that you already don't like me, and are somewhat dissatisfied with me, right?" The surrounding Fuyunji people mostly stood expressionlessly, their heads lowered, or looking into some unknown dark place. If it was possible, there probably weren't many among them who were willing to stand here and listen to these two people start to show off their abilities. And that woman, at this moment, looked like a sword that was slowly being unsheathed. Cold light flashed, and the sharpness gradually revealed, causing people's hearts to palpitate. However, when Lu Chen looked over, he didn't seem to feel anything. In front of Xueying's imposing manner, he also didn't seem to have any intention of retreating. He stared fixedly at Xueying. After a while, he suddenly opened his mouth and said something that didn't make sense. He said, "Have you acknowledged him as your master?" Xueying was startled, and then subconsciously shook her head. Before she could speak, she saw Lu Chen standing there, his gaze suddenly sharp, like a knife that wanted to cut people's hearts, to prick the hidden wounds, to flip over the bloody places and show them to the public. He opened his mouth coldly, and each word was like a flying dagger as he said, "Then what gives you the right to call me Junior Brother Lu? Do you have the right?" He said calmly and coldly. In the night, everyone, including old Ma, was stunned at that moment. Then, they subconsciously held their breath, leaving only a deathly silence. Chapter 580. On this night, the conflict between Lu Chen and Xueying had come without warning. Furthermore, the intensity of the conflict had exceeded everyone's expectations. In almost an instant, the two most capable subordinates of Supreme Lord Tianlan, who were also the most likely to inherit his legacy, had shed all pretenses of cordiality and directly confronted each other. Of course, although the situation had become unusually tense, if one were to trace back to the source, the biggest reason for the situation to escalate was because Lu Chen had unceremoniously pointed out Xueying. Furthermore, he had done so in front of so many people, most of whom were Fuyunji subordinates. Faced with Lu Chen's accusation, Xueying could not back down at all. She could only retaliate. In fact, the conflict had been manageable at the beginning. However, Lu Chen seemed determined to blow things up tonight. Especially after he had said that heart-wrenching sentence about whether or not Xueying was qualified, the situation had completely gone out of control. Xueying's abilities were extremely strong. Regardless of whether it was in terms of cultivation or in leading a large organization like the Floating Clouds Division, she had always proven herself to be an outstanding leader. She had always been publicly acknowledged as the second most powerful person under True Lord Tianlan. However, everyone in the world knew one fact: although Supreme Lord Tianlan was talented and bold, and his name shook the world, he had never accepted a disciple. Xueying was Supreme Lord Tianlan's subordinate. She was his right-hand man and his trusted aide. However, she was not a disciple of Supreme Lord Tianlan. Lu Chen was only a latecomer. However, Lu Chen was a disciple who had held a disciple ceremony and was personally acknowledged by Supreme Lord Tianlan. He was known by all of Zhengxianmeng, and even the whole world, as the person who would inherit Supreme Lord Tianlan's legacy in the future. This was a difference in status. This was a completely different fate. It seemed rather cruel. Do you have the right? Under the night sky, a deathly stillness enveloped the front of the house. Although there was no sound, Lu Chen's mocking and straightforward words still seemed to reverberate in this place, like a whip, fiercely lashing at Xueying's face. Xueying did not have the right to call Lu Chen junior brother Lu. No matter how old she was in Fuyunji and how powerful she was still not True Lord Tianlan's disciple and successor. She was just a subordinate, she was just an outsider. In the past, Lu Chen didn't express any objection or disdain towards this form of address. This wasn't a big deal, but now, it seemed like he was going to bring this matter up in front of everyone tonight and slap Blood Warbler in the face. He succeeded. At that moment, Blood Warbler was speechless, and the surrounding people held their breaths in silence. Even those who were the most loyal to Blood Warbler in Fuyunji stood in place and did not move. Everyone knew that although Lu Chen was despicable, and although his words were so straightforward and hurtful, his words were not wrong. Amidst the cold silence, a man slowly walked out from an inconspicuous corner behind the crowd. He looked at the man and woman standing in the center of the field from afar. It was He. Lu Chen's words just now seemed to echo in his heart and mind, reminding him that he had once been in the same awkward situation as Blood Warbler today. He was clearly only one step away, and if that high and mighty lord agreed to take him in as a disciple, then everything would be different. At that moment, He suddenly felt that he was very similar to Blood Warbler. They had both done their utmost to serve True Lord Tianlan, and they had both risked their lives for him. They were both so outstanding that most people recognized them, and they were only one step away from the peak in their hearts. Just that one step was like the difference between heaven and earth. He's gaze was a little dark and uncertain. He let out a soft sigh and seemed to have thought of something. The corners of his mouth slightly curled up, as if he was secretly happy and pleased with his choice. In front of the house, Blood Warbler naturally did not know that there was a person called He who actually appreciated her in his heart. Of course, even if she knew, she would not feel any gratitude towards him. It was more likely that she would snort disdainfully. She was a proud woman. In order to prove her excellence, she had worked very hard all these years. She had done her best, and the results were also pretty much the best, except for the fact that she had not been able to catch that hateful elder ghost. Also, except for the lord whom she had followed loyally for many years. Although he had given her power, fame, and a position that everyone admired, he had never taken her in as his disciple. She had once thought that everything would come naturally, and that this was just a test from the Lord True Lord. Or perhaps there was something that she had not done well enough. After all, a godlike figure like True Lord Tianlan had such a vast and magnificent foundation. If she wanted to become his successor, she would definitely have to be even more outstanding. That was why Blood Warbler had never complained. She had only worked hard to make herself more outstanding, so that she could build his empire for him. Until one day, a person called Lu Chen appeared and became his disciple. And now, this Lu Chen, who had snatched away all of her hopes, had coldly asked her this question in front of her. Do you have the qualifications? This was the sharpest knife that Blood Warbler had ever heard or seen in her life. When it pierced into her chest, that kind of pain felt as if all the decades of suppression had been triggered in an instant, and then exploded out, wanting to tear her entire body apart, throwing everything that she had once treasured onto the ground and trampling on it. It made her wish she was dead, and made her wish she was dead. It turned out that all these years had been for naught. Her face was deathly pale, and her lips were trembling slightly. She stared fixedly at Lu Chen. If looks could kill, then Lu Chen would definitely have died 100 times. Unfortunately, he could not. She slowly raised her hand and pointed at Lu Chen. Word by word, it was as if all the anger in her body was gathered in that one word. You, actually, dare, like this, even now. Lu Chen still had no intention of backing down. He looked coldly at this extremely angry woman and said, "Today's matter is not your chance. Don't even think of using this against me or my people." After saying this, he turned and walked down the stone steps. Under everyone's gaze, he walked all the way to the side of Old Ma and Black Dog. Then, he swept his gaze across the faces of the people surrounding him. His gaze was a little cold, and there was a hint of provocation in it. However, the people opposite him all avoided his gaze. After a moment of stalemate, they slowly retreated into the darkness. Standing in front of the house, Blood Warbler's face became even paler. Atsu moved his head to Lu Chen's side and rubbed against his leg. Old Ma's expression was still solemn, but it could be seen that he was relieved. However, when he walked to Lu Chen's side, he hesitated for a moment and said in a low voice, "It's not worth it for you to shed all pretense of cordiality like this." Lu Chen did not look at him. He just turned around and said lightly, "After so many years, I only have you as my subordinate. Although you're useless, I can't just let you be harmed by others." Old Ma looked at him for a while, then nodded and smiled. Then, he puffed out his chest and followed behind Lu Chen. Together with the majestic and grimacing Atsu, they once again walked towards the house. Blood Warbler was still standing there, but this time, Lu Chen did not even look at her. He just walked past her and strode into the house that was filled with the thick smell of blood. Only Blood Warbler was left. Under the strange gazes of the crowd, she stood alone at the door. Chapter 581. Lu Chen and Xuang actually did not make a move until the very end. At the end of the day, the two of them were just using their mouths and not their fists. They could still leave some leeway if they argued and ridiculed each other too much, but if they really fought without caring about anything else, the situation would be completely out of control. The two of them would no longer have a way out. It could even be said that if they fought, they would not leave any leeway for Supreme Lord Tianlan, who had yet to show himself. If it really came to that, Supreme Lord Tianlan could only choose between the two of them and completely give up on the other. The word "give up" here basically meant that one would never be able to make a comeback. To put it simply, it was probably the word death. Lu Chen was a smart person. He could acutely sense that Xuang seemed to be intentionally using this sudden incident to attack the prestige and influence of his side. Although it was obscure, there was a hint of sharpness in it. Therefore, he made a judgment in an instant and directly exposed the conflict between the two of them in an attempt to provoke Xuang. Xuang was also a smart person. She had been arrogant for so many years in power. Apart from the few divine transformation true lords in Zhengxianmeng, when had she ever lowered her head to anyone? But this time, she actually managed to forcefully endure it until the very end. In the end, the two of them did not cross that line. The footsteps gradually faded away. It seemed like Lu Chen had already brought Old Ma and Atsu into the house. However, Xuang was still standing at the main entrance. It had been many years since anyone had dared to reprimand and ridicule her like this. This was quite a loss of face. She looked around and swept her gaze across those people. At this time, even more people had gathered. Most of them were from Fuyunji, while some were from Supreme Lord Tianlan's faction. For example, there were also quite a few from the Kunlun party. They could all be considered as her own people. However, the more people there were, the more intense the burning sensation on his face seemed to be. Other than that, so many people had seen this scene. Although no one dared to look her in the eye at this moment, and most people looked away or lowered their eyes when her eyes swept across, Shuang knew clearly that as long as the sun rose, the entire Celestial Dragon Mountain, the entire Zhengxianmeng, would probably know what had happened here tonight. It was impossible to keep this information a secret. Someone would definitely leak it out, and it was very likely that more than one person would. There were no secrets in Zhengxianmeng. She suddenly felt a little tired, and also a little lost. When she swept her gaze across the crowd just now, she clearly saw that in the eyes of these Fuyunji subordinates who were usually loyal to her, there were shock, doubt, anger, sympathy, and all sorts of other emotions. However, there was only one thing that she had secretly hoped for in the depths of her heart. Yes, these elite troops who would normally risk their lives because of a word or order from her, in tonight's conflict, almost all of them had unanimously chosen to stay out of it. Not a single person stood up for her, shouted for her, or attacked her in anger because of her humiliation. Perhaps if something like that really happened, she would berate and stop them, but she did not. From that moment on, Shuang understood one thing. Even though she had worked hard for so many years, even though she had given everything she had to Fuyunji, Fuyunji did not belong to her. Fuyunji would forever belong to the high and mighty true Lord Tianlan. Because of this, when she and Lu Chen had a fierce conflict, although she was still the leader of Fuyunji, no one in Fuyunji stood up to support her. Everyone watched from the sidelines because they knew that what Lu Chen had said was not wrong. Lu Chen had the status of master and disciple, but Shuang did not. Indeed, Shuang did not have the right to call him that. In other words, everyone present was a smart person. No one would have guessed that after true Lord Tianlan passed away, there would only be one person who would inherit this magnificent foundation. No one stood up to support her. In that instant, Shuang felt as if all the strength in her body had been sucked out. She silently looked up at the sky. The night was dark, and a trace of pain flashed through her eyes. Why was this? Decades of kindness and loyalty still could not be exchanged for that person's pity? In what way could she not compare to Lu Chen? People said that true Lord Tianlan was omnipotent and omniscient. If this was true, then why hadn't he shown up until now? Was he trying to make something clear or hint at something? Shuang slowly turned around and walked into the house with some difficulty. It was hard to imagine that not long ago, she was still in high spirits and full of ambition, ready to show off her skills. But now, she seemed to have suddenly fallen into a predicament. Had she underestimated Lu Chen, or had she misjudged Tianlan? Behind the crowd, he stared at the beautiful woman in front of the gate and frowned slightly. A trace of sympathy seemed to flash through his eyes. He then shook his head gently, sighed, and looked away. This night seemed to be especially long. Even now, it was still dark, and there was no sign of dawn. The smell of blood kept drifting from the front, nauseating and disgusting. Lu Chen and Old Ma both frowned. The two of them were not good people, and they had seen some very tragic things. But no matter what, this kind of thing was never pleasant. It was very peaceful along the way. The people of Fuyunji had already completely controlled this place, but almost no one spoke. Only the faint cries of pain in the distance seemed to emit a desolate atmosphere. The road, the walls, and even the flower corridors and other places were very clean. The Azura Hell, the scene of mountains of corpses and seas of blood, had not appeared yet. But this did not make Lu Chen and old Ma feel any more relaxed. There was no one on the road, but the atmosphere was still so strong. Then, the situation in the place where something really happened could be imagined. Seeing that there was no one nearby, old Ma suddenly walked 2 steps faster and came to Lu Chen's side, walking side by side. Lu Chen turned his head and glanced at him with a gloomy face. Old Ma stared at him. After a while, he finally could not help but grab his hand. The two of them stopped and stood still. Old Ma lowered his voice and said bitterly, "This has nothing to do with you, right?" Lu Chen looked at him silently and said after a moment, "Do you think it is possible for me to do such a thing?" Old Ma gritted his teeth and said, "I believe you did not do it, but we both know in our hearts that as long as you harden your heart, maybe you will do it." Lu Chen snorted and said, "I just did it to save you. Don't you know that?" "I know." Old Ma said flatly, "I am very grateful and gratified, but I want you to tell me that you did not do it for revenge." Lu Chen looked at him quietly. After a while, he nodded and said calmly, "I did not do it." Old Ma suddenly felt relieved and let out a long sigh. Then he smiled bitterly and said, "That's good, that's good. It's not far ahead, let's go and have a look." As he said, his face looked a bit bitter and sympathetic. He whispered, listening to that voice, "Chen, he seems to be going crazy." "I don't know, what happened?" Lu Chen glanced at him and said nothing. He just walked forward. In the smell of blood, they walked to the bedroom in the backyard. Then they saw Chen He, who had just greeted them with a smile outside the Tingyu building not long ago. That man fell to the ground in the courtyard and looked in the direction of a bedroom. His whole body was twitching and trembling, crying and wailing, as if he had suddenly broken down. Standing around the courtyard were a dozen or so members of the Floating Clouds Agency. Every single one of them had an ugly expression on their faces. Lu Chen and old Ma's eyes immediately fell on the bedroom door that was half closed. At the same time, footsteps sounded again. It was Shuang, with a cold face, who had also come here. They looked at the bedroom together. Then, they could sense a strong smell of blood surging out from it. Lu Chen stood where he was for a moment and then walked over. Under everyone's gaze, he slowly walked to the door of the bedroom alone. Then, he gently pushed open the half-closed door and glanced into the room. Old Ma looked at him from behind and could vaguely feel that at that moment, Lu Chen's body seemed to stiffen. After a while, Lu Chen slowly took 2 steps back and turned around. This time, his gaze fell on Chen He, who was lying on the ground. Everyone in the courtyard, including Shuang, looked at him with a somewhat complicated expression. But Lu Chen turned a blind eye to these gazes from the outside. He walked to Chen He's side. Chen He seemed to have no feelings for him at all and was only wailing with a hoarse voice. Lu Chen stretched out his palm and patted his shoulder. After a while, he said, "First, restrain your grief and accept your fate." After a while, he opened his mouth again and said, "This matter will not end like this. We will definitely give you an explanation." When he said this last sentence, his voice was a little louder. Almost everyone in the courtyard heard it. You're tuning into the Unparalleled SwordWill YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.